This happened 5 years ago when I was 19 living with my parents. We had a new neighbor who was super strange. She would watch us through her curtains and then quickly close them and run away, or she would stand outside smoking cigarettes, just staring at our house from her patio until we made eye contact, after which she would run inside. My parents started to leave for 1 to 2 weeks at the time to go check houses 3 hours away. My dad had just got a promotion and I would stay at our old house. I would still catch my neighbor staring at our house, but I was used to it by then. Oddly though, I started to feel super uneasy at night, like I was being watched for whatever reason, but I figured it was just my nerves from being alone. One night in particular, I felt extremely uncomfortable. I really felt like someone was watching me and I couldn't sleep. I called my boyfriend at the time and asked him to come over. He said no because he didn't want to drive, so I went around the house and turned on a ton of lights. I also barricaded the entrance and slept with a knife close by. I know, that sounds extra, but I was scared. I did this for 2 more days until my parents came back. When my parents came home, I explained what happened, and they thought I was just being paranoid. My dad started on some yard work, but then came into my room with my mom and angrily asked me if I had started smoking. I was shocked and said of course I hadn't. My bedroom window looks out into the yard, and my dad said that it was right next to my window. There were lipstick-covered cigarettes stuffed under the siding of the house. Obviously, we all had a pretty good guess of who it was, and my parents installed cameras. Our neighbor watched them being put up, and she stayed away after that, besides staring through her curtains. When we moved shortly afterwards, my parents picked a house that gave us more privacy and installed cameras on that new house too. I still think it's super freaky, and I will never doubt my intuition like that again. The story is about a neighbor I had once been fairly comfortable around, but that relationship changed nearly overnight and he started making me feel insanely uncomfortable to the point I broke my lease and moved out. I lived in the same apartment complex for 2 years, and across from me was my neighbor Sam. He seemed like a normal guy, a single father of 3. Over the 2 years I lived there, we had engaged in small talk many times, and I believed that he was a nice person. He felt like a father figure since he was twice my age and always seemed willing to help out if I needed it. Last summer, my region experienced an insane heat wave that we simply didn't have the infrastructure to deal with. It's common for apartments and homes in general in the northern US to not have AC. Temperatures were aiming to reach over 100 degrees, and without AC, we would all have to prepare to endure basically 90-degree heat in our homes with no relief. I purchased a portable AC unit, and me being from southern US, I didn't have the slightest clue of how to set it up, and all the online advice was only useful for windows that slid vertically. I had a unique dilemma given that my windows slid openly horizontally. After struggling with my AC vent for a while, I decided to knock on my neighbor's door for help. That turned out to be a big mistake. After he left my apartment, he started sending me text messages that made me feel quite uneasy. The first message was something along the lines of, "I could tell that we were nervous around each other. I'm shy. What are you up to tonight?" I was honestly grossed out and disturbed by this because it seemed delusional. I wasn't nervous around him at all because I'm simply not attracted to him, yet in his mind, I was nervous. I didn't reply. He proceeded to text me and call me every day and was even leaving me voicemails. He even blew me a kiss in one of the voice messages. I was starting to get scared because normal people don't continue to call and text someone that's not responding to them, yet this guy wouldn't leave me alone. I figured that if he was this unhinged, then outright rejecting him and telling him I wasn't interested could possibly be dangerous, so I continued to ignore him. If I was coming home at night, I always had a friend on the phone with me in case I bumped into him. I was becoming so on edge by all the unwanted contact that I called my cousin, who was a lawyer, to tell him everything that was going on. He asked me for my neighbor's full name. After looking him up, he found out that my neighbor was a convicted rapist. He had been in prison for 5 years for assaulting a 12-year-old girl. He was also able to find out that my neighbor had been arrested back in 1988 for armed burglary. These are just the 2 times he's been caught. I searched for a new apartment, and one with the easiest vacancy would be 3 weeks out. I had to wait. I went to the leasing office of my current apartment and told them everything that was going on. I ended up opting to break my lease and move out as soon as the new apartment was available. I'm so grateful I had a male friend over this particular night. The vent from my portable AC unit had fallen out of the window, and I was fiddling with it and trying to get it to sit tight like it was before. While doing so, I got another text. It was from my neighbor. It said, "I see you. You're looking really good tonight. Would you like some help?" Upon reading this, I realized he must have been outside and watching me in my window. I was shaking in fear. My friend saw how scared I was, and when I told him what happened, he went downstairs to confront Sam, pretended to be my boyfriend, and told him to stop texting me. I was so shaken up that I called out of work and booked the next flight to my home state to wait the remaining 3 weeks out at my best friend's apartment, far away from my creepy neighbor. I wasn't even going to allow any possibility for things to escalate further. Fast forward 3 weeks. I hired professional movers to get my stuff out of my old apartment. I was cleaning out the fridge, and my neighbor and I ended up coincidentally leaving our apartments at the same time. We made eye contact, and he licked his lips. That's the last time I saw him, and I'm so glad I moved. When I was 11, my single mom, 9-year-old sister, and 6-year-old brother moved into a beautiful older craftsman-style house. I heard it was around 80 years old back then, in 1984. Soon after we moved in, we found out that it was infested with cockroaches. I've never seen anything like it. You turn on the lights at night and they scattered from every surface. We had to store all the food that wasn't canned in the fridge so they wouldn't get into it. We tried bug bombs and professional exterminators numerous times with no effect. Those things can really survive a nuclear war. Anyway, they weren't the reason we lived in this house for less than a year before fleeing for our lives. I just thought it was an interesting side story. Anyway, I remember my mom discussing our next door neighbor's creepy son with my grandma. He was in his 20s or 30s. She had been doing the dishes one day and looked up to see him standing directly on the other side of the kitchen window, staring at her. Normally, she would have kept something scary like this from us kids, but about that time, she told us to tell her if we ever saw him near the house and we weren't allowed to play outside. She also told me a couple times that she woke up to see him standing over her bed, and one time he put a cloth with chemicals over her face to knock her out. This is the part of the story that I know the least about, since she didn't tell us until years later. I think she might have thought that she was dreaming, especially if he was drugging her. I don't know if anything else happened. I never asked her about it in case something did and it would bring up bad memories. So one afternoon we were doing some spring cleaning. My brother found a cigarette butt in the upstairs toilet. Weird, since no one in our family smokes. Being a dumb little 6-year-old, he flushed it down before telling our mom. I still remember her trying to get the entire story out of him, being upset that the evidence was gone, and thinking he might have been mistaken. Or maybe he picked up the butt somewhere outside out of curiosity. She soon dropped it, and we mostly forgot about it. I think it was a few weeks later. My brother was spending the night at our grandparents' house, and my sister and I were the only ones upstairs. Our mom's bedroom was downstairs. My sister heard a sound like the screen door slamming, but she insisted that it came from the house and she was freaking out. I told her it was from the outside and just go to sleep. A minute later, we heard a strangled cough coming from just outside our bedroom door, a man's cough, and it sounded like he was trying to keep from making noise. I whispered that we needed to go downstairs. We snuck out of the room, and I had the irrational urge to turn on the light in the bathroom, which was just across the hall from our bedroom, and check to see if anyone was there. Then, just as a strong feeling to get away from the bathroom and get downstairs now. The scariest moment of my life was when we were creeping down the stairs in pitch black. It was a spiral enclosed stairway with walls, the perfect place for someone to hide. The stairway light was burnt out, and the wood steps were creaky, so it was terrifying making our way down. We got downstairs and woke up our mom, panicked that there was a guy upstairs in our bathroom. She started to tell us to go back to bed, but could see that we were seriously scared. She went over to the bottom of the stairway to go up and show us that there was nothing to be scared about. Then she had just as strong of a feeling to close the stairway door and lock it. She did, called the cops, and they found nothing and didn't really take us seriously. The next day, she called a PD detective friend of hers from high school to come over and inspect the house, remembering the cigarette butt in the toilet. She had him look out the upstairs bathroom window. It was a very high, narrow, rectangular window, not very big, but just wide enough for a person. Who knows how many times the intruder climbed on our roof to get in and went upstairs while we were sleeping across the hall. The window swung up on hinges. When my mom's friend let the window drop, it sounded like the screen door slamming. He said that the locks on the windows were so old that they were practically useless, and we needed to get out of the house immediately. We moved into our grandparents' house that day. When my mom went with her brothers a few days later to pack some things up, the back door had been smashed open, but nothing in the house was disturbed. A few years later, we heard that the neighbor's son was arrested for rape and attempted murder. I still wonder what would have happened if I had turned on the bathroom light, if my mom didn't lock the stairway door, or if we didn't leave that house when we did. I also wonder if it's still infested with cockroaches. Update. My mom got back to me. She said she only remembers seeing him in her room one time and felt like she was struggling to stay awake. Another time, she didn't clearly wake up but felt like someone was trying to get something off her mouth. That's all she can remember, so I did get the details a little wrong in my memory. No wonder she didn't think anything was wrong at first if she thought that they were only dreams. The cigarette butt was a clue, and what my sister and I heard was also proof. As a single mom myself, I can only imagine how freaked out my mom must have been when her friend told her that she needed to get out immediately. This is not necessarily threatening, but something I have come to think about a few times over the past few years. I was about 6 or 7 when me and my older friend were messing around in the neighborhood, doing random stuff, when we decided to visit a lady who lived in a house in the street right below mine. The lady was about 26 to 30 years old, and we would visit her every once in a while. She would give us small gifts like video games and makeup she had laying around. None of our families knew the lady, but she had lived there for a good decade beforehand. It was pretty late when we knocked on her door, and when she came out, we asked her if we could come over for a visit, but she told us she had her boyfriend coming over. So me and my friend parted ways, and we went home for the night. About an hour later, I was just sitting on the sofa when I looked down at her house and spotted a man walking inside her house. I didn't think much of it other than it must be her boyfriend, and I eventually went into my room to go to sleep. I wasn't really tired, so I went to just look out my bedroom window, which had an even more direct view towards the lady's house. I saw the lady stand on her balcony and the boyfriend standing at the ground. She had a shovel in her hand, and it seemed like she was yelling at him. About 5 minutes later, she goes down to the ground level where the guy is standing, and she starts beating him in the head with a shovel. As I watched it, completely frozen, she was beating him pretty badly, and the guy ended up laying on the ground. There was very visibly a lot of blood on the rocks around him, and he had on a white hoodie, so it showed it pretty well. I went and got my mom to look, and she called the police. It turned out that the lady had a long criminal record and was known to be extremely violent. Something a 6-year-old me didn't quite catch, so for Christmas I was dealing out Christmas cookies and cards to the neighborhood, also to the lady. I don't remember the interaction very well, other than me knocking on the door, wanting to give her a Christmas card. When she pulled me inside to come talk to her husband, a new boyfriend I'm assuming, who was sitting on the couch, the lady asked me to repeat what I said to her about the card to the man. At this point, I was getting scared, so I ran out of her house and never returned again. Definitely observe who your kids visit. I moved back home about 3 years ago. My mom lives in a trailer park. I had never had any problems with the neighbors. I mind my own business, and they mind their own. My mom's fiance, on the other hand, being the social butterfly he is, has tried to get to know everyone coming and going around the block. So earlier this year, we started seeing a new guy next door living with what we thought was just a single mom and her child. I thought maybe it's her new boyfriend or something. Of course, my mom's fiance immediately starts getting to know the newbie of the neighborhood, but the months to come, things start to get weird. Whenever my sister would go outside, she would notice the new neighbor, Chris, would fly out the back door and do random mundane things. She would notice him watching out of the window quite often too, but we didn't pay any mind because sometimes my sister can be very dramatic. My mom's fiance used to let him use our water and water hose to water his garden. I never understood why, but when we got our water bill back and it was over $200, he told him that he couldn't continue to use it because things were getting so expensive. He immediately got aggressive and tried to tell him we're the ones that are using too much water, not him, which we've never gotten a bill that high since living here. Last week I got a random friend request from my neighbor. Not thinking too much of it, I approved it. My mom's fiance lets me know that Chris talked about how pretty I was and asked him for my Facebook information, but that he had acted like he didn't know if I had a Facebook or not. The realization kicks in that he went through 100 of my mom's fiance friends on Facebook to find my profile. By this point, we've already been talking over Facebook, but it has been a friendly chat, so no harm. Plus I figured he has seen that I have a boyfriend because my profile clearly states that I'm in a relationship. I mentioned to Chris what my mom's fiance said, and he said he wasn't going to sugarcoat anything, that he actually called me sexy as fuck. I let it be known that I have a boyfriend, and he apologizes. If you think that's the last time he made a comment or a pass, you're wrong. It's like he completely disregards that I'm with someone. He even asked me to go to the woods with him, meet him outside at night, and just in general made me so uncomfortable. At this point, I'm over talking to him, but one crucial information my mom's fiance left out was that he had just got out of prison months ago for some really bad stuff. Breaking and entering, arson, to name a few, and the worst one was manslaughter for shanking a man while he was serving time. He claims it was self-defense. I have no idea how he's even walking freely right now, but I digress. So usually once a guy doesn't take the hint of, I have a boyfriend, I usually tell him to fuck off, block them, and be done with it, but my mother doesn't think that's the best course of action. I even brought up ghosting him, but she still thinks that he could just walk over, and if he sees me out front and confront me about leaving him on red. He's actually been caught walking through our yard trying to find me, so her theory is not far-fetched. My family and boyfriend are terrified for me. My mom tells me that I'm no longer allowed to go outside by myself. I'm just trying to save up enough money to move away from here. Edit/update. Thank you all for taking the time to read and reply. Last night my family, boyfriend and I were outside on the front porch, just hanging out. We started hearing yelling next door, and the creepy neighbor sped off in his truck. A few moments later he came back and we heard the woman screaming, "Keep your hands off of me." Police were called and more people showed up at the home. My mom, boyfriend and I left to go to town. It was dark, but when we pulled up to the end of the street to go onto the main road, our headlights lit up a person standing on the side of the road. It was a creepy neighbor clutching his phone, looking up the road. Today I found out that he lied about being single and was cheating on the mother of his children. This poor woman has done everything for him, only for him to try cheating on her with 16 other women. You could say his dirty ways caught up to him, and she now kicked him out to the curb. He's no longer living next door. As for the commotion we heard, I know she owns all the cars they have there, so I'm guessing he tried to take off in one of them once she confronted him about all the dirty messages. She must have made him come back with it since it was hers, and he brought it back and tried fighting her. He must have known someone was going to call the cops, so he ran on foot given his record and didn't want to go back to jail, which is why we saw him at the end of the street looking scared in the dark. I'm not sure if that's exactly what transpired, but on everything I've heard from last night and from his ex herself, this is my best guess. To the woman next door, I'm so sorry that you and your family had to deal with this. You don't deserve any of it. As for the creepy neighbor, good riddance, and I hope you get what's coming to you. To start, I was 10 years old at the time, and back then, my grandparents used to own a whole apartment complex, and the leasing office was attached to their house in the complex, so this is where I spent most of my childhood. My grandmother would run the office and my grandfather would do all the physical labor around with the other workers. I spent a lot of time in this complex riding my bike, walking my Jack Russell, playing in the creeks behind the trees, like normal kid stuff, nothing crazy. I always felt safe around there, and everyone knew me as the owner's grandchild. Certain parts of these memories get a little foggy as I get older, so I can't remember every incident. But I remember enough to know that this man, well, something just wasn't right about him. The first time I met him, I was walking around the complex, doing nothing in particular, but minding my own business, and I see him. He approaches me and begins to make small talk, and me being friendly, always spoke back. He mentioned how he just moved in. His apartment is super cool, and he doesn't mind if me and my friends ever want to come over. Didn't think nothing of it at the time, and agreed. But things started to progress the more I see him around. Eventually, I knew something wasn't right. The next time I met him, I was walking around the entrance of the apartment complex, and to add, Mercer County Community College was right behind the apartment complex, so I used to travel over there, and you could cut through the college by the entrance of the apartments. I was only over there because the overhead bridge that looked down into the creek was there. I used to enjoy peeking over and seeing fish swim around. Well, once I was done looking, I turned around, and there he was, in the walkthrough of the apartment and the college, peeping through the bushes. He turns around and exposes himself, and apologizes for me seeing him like this. Of course, as a 10-year-old, your brain doesn't process things as easily, so I told him it was okay and walked away. He just stood there, reminding me about visiting his apartment, and that was the end of it. I went home. Now he started getting really creepy because the following two encounters I very clearly remember were the final straws to it all, and the little 10-year-old me started realizing this wasn't okay. I was walking my dog Buddy one day, and he sees me again and approaches me. He asked me if he could pet the dog. I was hesitant, but agreed, because my dog was very friendly, and I never taught him to be mean. He crouches down to pet him, and his penis fell out of the side of his shorts, and this is when I realized he wasn't okay. He sat there petting my dog and groping himself very visibly for me to see. I was appalled. I honestly didn't know what to do, and alarms were raising in my head. I stared at what he was doing as he asked me what I like to do, if I like to come over and play video games with him. I just told him one day and told him I better get going so I could finish walking my dog. The final encounter, I was with my best friend who was 10 at the time and my sister who was 3 at the time. We decided to take the dog for a walk. He was fun to walk with, very hyper, and would drag you if you let him. We were walking in the backyard of some apartments, and lo and behold, he appears, almost like he knew we were there, like he was watching us. He began to casually talk, complimenting my dog and asking us if we wanted to see his dog. My little sister agreed and walked a little closer as he pulled out his phone. I was fooled for a second and thought maybe he really does have a dog. He crouched down next to my sister and started showing her photos. As I got closer, I realized that he was showing nude photos of him and his quote-unquote dog. Then I realized he was groping himself and exposed himself through his shorts again. He was too close to my baby sister for comfort, and it made me very uncomfortable. He could have snatched her and ran if he really wanted to, and I always think about that. I was in a state of shock as I realized he was inviting us over again. My best friend realized that this was creepy as well, and we just exchanged looks. I knew I needed to get us out of here, so I bent down to pet my dog, and I clipped his leash knowing that he would dart away at intense speed. As he did just as I planned, we yelled, "The dog is loose." I grabbed my sister and noped the fuck out of there, and left him exactly where he remained, just staring. We ran home in tears to tell my grandfather everything I experienced since the day he moved in. I felt horrible knowing that I let it escalate so long to the point that others around me were exposed to it. The cops were called and he was arrested on the spot, and we had to tell everything to a child investigator, cops, the news. It was a lot, and after he was gone, reality set in, and so did the trauma. I swear the dog saved us and got us out of there, and I miss him every day, because if I didn't have him, I wouldn't have known what to do. I just think more so about what would have happened if I fell for going into his apartment, or worse, if he got his hands on a child that was 10 times more gullible than me. Fucked up part is, he only stayed in jail for the weekend, till his family bonded him out. And if you're reading this, Giovanni, rot in hell, you creep. Update. Posting this made me search on him a little more. He's still alive, unfortunately. He moved to the next state over to Pennsylvania, and his address and phone number are public. Apparently, he's a mechanic now as well. I'm a 28-year-old female. I have lived in the same apartment for 4 years. My neighbors in the unit above me are in their 30s, who have lived there for about 3 years with no issues between us. During the past 6 months, I've noticed some changes in their behavior. At first, it was a few days per week. I'd hear music with heavy bass accompanied by rhythmic jumping. I assumed they bought an exercise bike or something, but sometimes the jumping gets so intense it shakes my overhead light fixtures. The jumping routine has been escalating to the point that it takes place every day now, normally between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m. I noticed that they called 1-800-JUNK to get rid of a lot of nice possessions. However, I figured none of my business, so I kept my observations to myself. About 3 weeks ago, everything escalated, multiple times per week, on weekdays, during working hours. It sounds like they're hosting a mini Burning Man event in their apartment. Their music is so loud and clear that it sounds like I'm at a concert while sitting in my living room. There's clearly a lot of people involved because the jumping and stomping shakes multiple light fixtures and cabinets. The music is a mix of new age spiritual vibes, dance beats, and a male voiceover giving weird instructions like, "Rebrand yourself, surrender yourself," with 2 stomps in response. I've taken audio recordings on my phone and one from the hallway during these events. I still didn't complain to the building, but I wanted evidence in case it became a regular thing. This week, I've encountered a big problem. The couple above me has a private patio, which is directly above my bedroom. I came home from a 3-day trip out of town yesterday, and my ceiling is legitimately collapsing in one corner. Big chunks of plaster has fallen onto the ground, and I saw a little water. I immediately called my superintendent, since I don't want to be buried alive by my ceiling rubble if it gives out. When he came to check it out, he was so shocked and pissed. He said the woman in the couple appears to be working with some people, doing workshops or something. He could see their patio from his apartment window, and he's watched a group of them do this dance, plus jumping, out there on a weekly basis. He says they all dance and jump to the music, and then spread out dirt along with something else, he doesn't know what it is, across a patio on a weekly basis. He assumes that the dirt plus the unknown substance combo is getting through the wood cracks, absorbing water, and weighing down the ceiling. To fix the problem, my super had to talk to the woman, check out their patio, and ultimately hire a contractor to pull up the wood and scrape out whatever the hell was causing my ceiling to fall. I can hear them talking from my room. The woman sounded distraught and defensive. When the super left, he called me and warned me that she might try to come down to my apartment and demand to see the damage, but don't let her in. This was a little concerning to me. Is she a threat? The damage is real, I wouldn't mind showing her. She started playing her music again, relatively loud, kinda like a warning shot. I mentioned the music jumping to the super and said I have audio recordings. He started begging me to send the evidence to the front office. It sounds like he wants them evicted. I said okay, sure. I hate to be a rat, but if I have to choose sides, I'll side with the building that dictates my annual rent price. He called me twice more that afternoon to confirm that I shared my evidence, and I said yes. Shortly after everything went down, I left my apartment to run an errand. The woman was outside, just standing on the sidewalk. She stared at me the whole time as I walked by. I just ignored her. Now today, I went to run another quick errand in my neighborhood. When I returned, the couple was standing on the sidewalk, both of them this time, followed me into the building and then waited until I opened my apartment door to confront me. They both were wearing creepy fake smiles and started interrogating me. They asked, "Is your ceiling really collapsing? When did it start? Do you think it's related to the recent rainfall? Because our patio is just fine." I was a little uncomfortable. Were they waiting for me outside? How did they know that I even left the building? Why were they both standing there? I've literally never seen them together in the 3 years of living here. But I have nothing to hide, so I confirmed the damage is pretty bad. I just don't want it to fall during the winter. I'm sorry for the inconvenience, but hopefully the work will be done quickly for everyone's sake. They seemed satisfied, so I said good day and shut my door. I'm getting the sense that they're nervous about what the contractors will find when they tear open their patio. What the fuck is up with this dirt rituals? Who are these people she's working with? I don't know what they look like or why they're available to stomp around on the weekdays. The repair work has started on both sides, but the contractor will come on Wednesday for the grand reveal of what's under the patio that is causing my ceiling to collapse. In the meantime, I feel like I need to be alert and keep my eyes out for these people, as well as the couple. It's unusual for me to see them in general, especially twice in 2 days. They seem scared and in denial of the problem. They also literally ambushed me. Hopefully it's over soon. The contractors came today and reported that there was in fact dirt and sludge visible below the neighbor's patio. However, thanks to the help of my internet sleuthing friend, I've gained a lot more insight into the realm that dwells above me. As one Redditor suggests, my neighbor is affiliated with multiple aesthetic dance communities, both international and local. The international group has planned events during which all cells of the organization host a dance session simultaneously. It also has a YouTube channel that streams psytrance music 24/7. I listened to a portion of it and a female voiceover declared, "You are becoming the Game Master." Meanwhile, the local groups seem to be more exclusive and more radical in their mindset. One of the local groups, hosted by my neighbor's good friend, conducts 3-day events that cost upwards of $400 for admission. Participation in all 3 days is mandatory. I get the impression that they all sleep in the studio space, and the event description mentions that it begins with a ritual. The last and darkest affiliation that I've confirmed via social media footprints is that my neighbor and a few members of the local communities are also involved in some compassionate death groups. There's no way for me to verify at this time if those affiliates overlap in a meaningful way, so I'll simply state the fact that I have evidence to prove. My super asked me about the jumping again when I saw him today. He remains eager to act. He agreed with the new game plan to wait for another large event to happen, and then call him to check on my dishwasher so he can intervene. So for now, the ways in which my puzzle pieces of ecstatic dance, compassionate death, patio dirt rituals, and ceiling collapse connect will remain a mystery. Update. On Monday, the super came to replaster my bedroom ceiling. First, he said that the neighbors told the contractors she had a lot of plants because she likes to make bush medicines. She also told him that dancing is a part of her professional practice as a healer for people that were on bereavement after the loss of a loved one. So my friend and I weren't far off when we made the connection between her dance and the compassionate death affiliations. I showed him the new cracks in my living room ceiling that are growing in size and number by the day. He told me to send the video of the cracks to the building manager, but the management suggested I start with a handwritten note by their door explaining how their behaviors are wreaking havoc on my life. Since the super was working in my apartment and my neighbor was actively bumping music and jumping, I wrote a note in which I requested she reduce the volume of her music and be mindful of the intensity of her activities. I explained that the jumping or dancing was causing significant new cracks in my living room ceiling, and I offered for her to speak with me directly if needed. While I was reluctant to suggest this, I knew she might try another stalking trick if I didn't give her the option up front. So I sent her the note. After 90 minutes, my super said that he had to leave for an hour while the plaster dried, but that he would be back soon. Of course, my neighbor chose the end of this time frame to come down when I was alone. When I opened the door, she had the biggest fake smile and said, "Hi," then waved a note. "First of all," she said, "I want to thank you for your open communication. That is so important and rare in this city." Fake flattery. She admitted that she dances, which she has to do for her mental health, but she claimed that she only dances in the morning for 30 to 60 minutes, 90 minutes max. I knew she was lying, so I said her actions are affecting my mental health. She followed up with a range of excuses, including that they have been in the process of rearranging furniture, unpacking boxes, and that sometimes they watch movies in the evening with their loudspeakers. I showed her the cracks that were immediately visible from the doorway area. She pointed to one and said, "See, we used to have a table over there, but now we have two due to the furniture rearranging, so maybe that's the reason. We also have cracks in our ceilings, and we all have to share this space." I asked her about hosting any large events in the past month, which she flat out denied. She briefly mentioned that she does sessions, but didn't elaborate further. The following suggestion, I later realized, was entrapment. My neighbor said that she would give me her phone number, go upstairs, lower the volume, then I should text her to know if I could still hear it. Thankfully, my super came back while she was still in the process of sharing her contact information. She immediately tensed up, quickly gave the number, and then scurried off. As she passed my super, she randomly blurted out, "We're best friends now," referring to me and her. My super and I are both very aware of her antics, so of course, he didn't buy that manipulation tactic. I texted her that I couldn't hear her music now, which she responded, "So glad to hear that. Thanks. Thanks again for the open line of communication. I'm always happy to chat. Hope you have a lovely day," with the prayer hands and heart emoji. In retrospect, I don't think she was playing any music at all. I also felt like the conversation was riddled with gaslighting, misdirection, and flat out lies. I was somewhat confused, but I know what I've been experiencing and have plenty of evidence to prove it. Within hours of our conversation, my neighbor started up the loud music and dancing as if nothing had happened. I was furious. I took new audio recordings and immediately emailed the building management with my new evidence. Footage of the cracks, along with a photo of my note. I explained that the contact with my neighbor was kind, though somewhat misleading, and expressed interest in accommodating my request. I also said her behaviors were continuing as normal, despite the false claims that she would take my experiences into account. The building manager said to keep her updated, but it was clear that she assumed that the situation would be resolved on its own. Nope. My neighbor continued the incessant bass-heavy music plus jumping the next day and the day after. I continued to document everything. On Wednesday evening, I went out for a quick errand and again was a victim of their stalking tricks. She ran into me as I was entering the building, waiting until I passed her on the stairway and then spoke up. She acknowledged that I probably had been hearing her activities the past couple days and that I would continue hearing them for the next few days, all due to rearranging furniture. She said that the coffee table had been sold today. Not true. I was working in my living room all day and would have heard such commotion in the stairwell. I said yes, I've been hearing her loud and clear. Shortly after my in-person encounter, my neighbor went to host a party. I heard people in the stairwell who seemed unfamiliar with whose apartment that they were even visiting, and one guest introduced herself as a friend of someone else. While the music was much slower, the group began to run back and forth overhead. Hearing these strange activities without the music was somewhat creepier than with the music. I took more recordings, then retreated to my bedroom, but of course, the group decided to migrate to their patio, right above my head again. By 10:30, I had enough. They were no longer dancing, but the group's chatter along with the music, a female soprano singing, was just too much. I sent her a text. I explained that I understood that she has every right to host guests in her space, but I was perturbed by the way she said to my face that any excess noise I might hear in the coming days was from rearranging furniture. I said I could hear music and the conversations clearly as the noise filters through my AC unit. I also said to please let me know if she was hosting events in the future so I'm not caught off guard. While my neighbor didn't respond that night, within minutes of sending the message, the group began to sing happy birthday songs in the most somber way I've ever heard it sung. I was able to record the second half of it. They sung in monotone, and there's no clapping, cheering, or any standard signs of merriment that occurred after singing the song. The following afternoon, my neighbor sent me a wall of text in which she continued to lie. She said that the gathering was very small, only 4 friends, so it didn't even cross her mind to let me know when she saw me earlier. She also said that this was the first time she hosted more than 2 people over the entire year. I honestly had to laugh at that. She said that when she first saw my text, they lowered the music volume and told the friends to quiet down. So she admitted that she saw my message, but made no mention of any birthday affair. As for the furniture rearranging, she explained that it had been part of a longer-term project, and added more lies like how they had just received the dining table and bookshelf that they had been waiting on for 8 months. Not only would I have seen a large package in the stairwell, but also why share so much irrelevant information if being truthful? Finally, my neighbor said that she would be hosting 2 more events next week, another small get-together of 4 friends next Wednesday in honor of her partner's birthday, and a larger gathering on Friday, again for his birthday. Like I said, she made no mention of singing happy birthday the night before. Who hosts 3 birthday parties over 2 weeks? It was all false. She followed up 5 minutes later with a second text that explained she was late to respond because she had been in back-to-back sessions. So I finally had written evidence of her talking about these sessions. I didn't respond to that text. I refused to engage with her or her partner any further. They continued to play music and stomp around that evening, but I had my boyfriend and my friend over, who heard everything and validated me that all of this was absolutely maddening. On Friday, I finally called my building manager to explain everything. She needed to understand that something very strange and potentially dangerous was going on above me. Thankfully, I was finally believed. It turns out that my building had no idea that she was running some form of business and hosting group events. I thought they at least had a vague awareness. My building manager said that they would get their attorney involved ASAP to review their lease contract and pursue action. She asked for all my evidence, including written communication, a personal written account of verbal communication, audio recordings, and footage of the ceiling damage. I've been taking videos of the ceiling cracks over the past few weeks to demonstrate how quickly they're growing. I made a Google folder that divided each category, dated every piece of evidence, and sent. I was so relieved. It felt like some form of action was finally in motion. I assumed that the building attorney was working on the case against them over the weekend, so I just ignored the relentless music and jumping. But today, Sunday, my neighbors have been hosting another gathering since 11:30 a.m. I've been hearing heavy bass, sporadic jumping, and chatting on their patio going on 7.5 hours now. While I've continued to collect evidence, I've decided to wait until tomorrow to check in with management. Around 5 p.m. I was quietly sitting on my couch when out of nowhere I heard the door open from above. Someone jogged down and pounded on my front door. I didn't move a muscle. The person on the other side waited for a minute. I thought I heard keys jiggling, and then slowly retreated back upstairs and shut the door again. Honestly, I have no idea what's going on. The music plus jumping increased after the knocking incident. Maybe they were testing if I was home, but I'm rattled by how I'm feeling being watched while minding my own business. At the same time, I want to keep laying low to protect myself. I still have very little information about this group. They're clearly escalating. 3 events planned within 1 week, despite the added pressure from everyone around them. About 12 years ago, my boyfriend at the time and I ended up finding a cheap, quiet studio to rent for practically free. Of course, we had to maintain the 3 properties there and help our landlord out with his meals and drive him out to eat, where he would also treat us for taking him out. The studio that we were moving into needed a decent amount of renovations to be comfortable and livable. It was pretty quiet and isolated on the top of that hill. Besides our studio, there was a neighbor across our driveway, about 150 feet away, plus our landlord who owned all 3 homes, located about 3/4 of a football field to the right of our studio. The landlord's girlfriend lived in an apartment above our landlord's garage. The landlord was extremely cool, so we got free cable, water, and power. We really only had to pay for propane for heat and water. The bill was to be split with a neighbor across the driveway from us, since we shared the large propane tank. We didn't officially meet our new neighbor until a few weeks after moving in. We all introduced ourselves and had a normal conversation. I got a chance to really talk to her. However, a couple weeks after our initial meeting, we stood outside talking for almost an hour when my renovations got brought up. I wanted to show her our great work, so we headed inside my place for a small tour. It was a studio, as I mentioned, so pretty much got the whole tour from just stepping in the front door. That's where the weirdness truly began. The actual first words she spoke upon stepping through the front door were, "Is that a used mattress?" while pointing at our bed. Now, if you know me, then you know when it comes to my beds, I keep them really clean. I mean, I like to straight up use a waterproof mattress cover to keep the mattress pristine with no stains and white still, and I only use good, clean sheets and blankets. So her question really threw me as I stared at our bright white clean mattress edge that was exposed as a result of me making the bed early this morning. All I could manage to say was, "No, I got it brand new." We all had varying work schedules, so I really didn't see her for another few weeks after that. But then the landlord's girlfriend pulled me aside one day with something pretty interesting to say. She told me that my neighbor had been telling her and the landlord that my boyfriend and I were known to have burglared houses. I was blown away. I wonder why she would say that. Neither my boyfriend nor I had even known anyone capable of that, let alone us being capable of that. The neighbor's daughter turned out to be a new cop and still worked at the jail for her first year. Supposedly, that's how the neighbor knew what she didn't even know. All I could really say to the landlord and his girlfriend was the obvious fact that we weren't even capable and couldn't even prove it, but we had clean criminal records, so we just dismissed it for the time being. After that, we started noticing dirty looks from the neighbor here and there, so naturally it was pretty awkward when I had to come over and knock on her door to collect her half of the propane bill. She gave me a check, and when I read her name out loud and looked into her eyes, I remember who she was. When I was about 16, so about 12 years or so before moving next door to her, I ended up at her house with my high school boyfriend for Thanksgiving. My boyfriend at the time's parents were friends with her and her husband, and they had a daughter who was our age also at the time. My boyfriend and I hung out with the daughter while the adults hung out and got drunk as they prepared dinner. I barely even remember interacting with adults, except of course at dinner. Yet after the evening, I was told by my boyfriend from his parents that I was no longer welcome back at his parents' friend's house. Neither my boyfriend nor I could possibly think of why. I found out a couple months later though. Let's just say I hit puberty pretty early and wasn't exactly flat-chested, unfortunately. That got me plenty of unwanted attention from the guys, even older ones. My boyfriend's dad at the time enjoyed staring at my chest and was pretty open about it. So no surprise that Thanksgiving night, as both men were at least very buzzed, they noticed my chest. Obviously, word got back to the women, and they weren't too happy. Add to that the fact that shortly before I moved next to her, years later, her husband had divorced her and she was quite bitter about it. I laughed at first upon reading the name on the check and asked her if she was the same last name that I had known in high school. She gave me a sideways smile and told me that she indeed remembered exactly who I was. That, combined with the fact that the landlord's girlfriend had told me that I was the only tenant that she ever had a problem with, told me that the worst was yet to come. It was just small things at first that we started to notice, like when I get home, I'd always hit the lock button on my key fob to my car, which would honk the horn to confirm that it was locked. Every single time I would do that though, she would always have her key fob with her in her house and make her car honk as well. Then, the landlord informed us that she requested that my boyfriend and I stay completely off her property and to not even knock on her door. But then right after that, she turned around and had our landlord ask us if we could come into her house while she was gone to set up a treadmill for her. She just left her front door unlocked for us to do it. One day, we had a friend stop by for a visit. He had a really weird look on his face when he came up through our walkway though. So naturally, my boyfriend and I looked at each other, and then asked him, "Why the face?" "Well," he said, as he sat down on the porch, "your neighbor, some woman, took a picture of my license plate as soon as I parked. Then she wanted to know if I was spending the night here." In shock and bewilderment, we asked him what she looked like just to make sure it was her. And yes, it surely was. She even took pictures of our license plate after that. She got really petty after that. She kept trying to keep track of whenever one of us would even step over the line to her half of the driveway. If she felt that we drove up the driveway in front of her house too fast, she would scream at whoever it was. That got me up in her face yelling one time. She even threatened to sue me once because, according to her, one of our cats was on her car and scratched her new car paint when she scared it off her car. I used a squirt bottle when I noticed the same cat on my similar dark colored new car one day, and no way were there scratches like she said. I mean, you could see on the clear coat where the cat's nails were, but it rubbed off just by using my finger. I started to worry about my 3 cats with her around, especially after one of my nosy ditzier cat wandered into her house after she left the front door open for a while. That cat disappeared shortly thereafter. My boyfriend and I smelled something dead around our property a couple months later after searching tirelessly for him, but we could never locate the source of that smell. Tensions between the three of us, and even the poor landlord and his girlfriend, were pretty high at that point. But it got worse one afternoon when I happened to catch her on my property. I was around the backside of our house talking to my boyfriend, but when I went to walk back around to our front door, I caught her. She was crossing back over our driveway towards her own house with this stupid, childlike guilt on her face. Believe it or not, it actually took a couple minutes for it to dawn on me that she had been sneaking around the side of our house to eavesdrop on us. Come to think about it, that's about the time I started hearing strange noises outside our window at night. Our mail situation was a bit strange at that place because there was only one mailbox for our address, which the three houses on the property shared. There's only one key to the mailbox, which the landlord had. The landlord and his girlfriend didn't drive anymore, so usually my neighbor lady would get the mail from the box for everyone and drop it off at the landlord's house so we could go get it from him. So one fine day, I trotted over to the landlord's to see if my check came in the mail. He said it hadn't come, and I could tell by just looking at the mail pile, it wasn't there. It was a state check, so it looked kinda obvious amongst regular mail. On the way out of the landlord's house, she was coming down the stairs on her way back. So I asked her if she happened to see it, and thought that maybe she was heading back to the landlord's house, maybe because she had forgotten to give it to him. But boy did she explode on me. She started yelling at me that she had no idea what I was even talking about. I didn't understand her reaction until a couple months later. I started noticing that I wasn't receiving certain important things that I was expecting in the mail, like my new driver's license, vehicle tags for registration, and pretty important social security paperwork. So I hatched a plan and informed the landlord first. The second person I clued in was our mailman, since it was a locked mailbox. Since there was only one key to the mailbox, my theory should be easy to prove, and it was. My plan was to address the envelope as important and coming in the mail for me. I only planned to give it to our mailman at our mailbox, so it would be missing a postmark, but I hoped that she would look over that small detail. After the mailman put it into our mailbox, I just had to wait for her to bring the mail to the landlord and see if she left it with the rest of the mail like she was supposed to. Sure enough, when I went to the landlord to pick up our mail, it wasn't there. Excited to finally make her face some consequences for her crappy actions, I immediately called the postmaster to report the mail theft. But unfortunately, being the beginning of a recession back then, the post office were too far understaffed to even explore the case. I also tried calling the sheriff, but the mail theft was federal territory. I started to notice that the noises outside my window at night were happening more frequently. Not only that, but I started waking up during the night to severe stomach pains and diarrhea that were usually gone by the morning. This would happen at least twice a month while living there. Then one day I went out into the front yard to talk on my cell phone. There was zero cell service inside my house. The neighbor lady suddenly appeared on her front porch and faced me while holding her cell phone towards me. I couldn't figure out if she was just eavesdropping on my phone call or maybe filming me. But after that, she would do it every time I was home and went out to make a phone call. On top of that, it gets worse when Miss worries about everyone else's company being legit, recommended some lady friend of her daughter and her boyfriend move into the landlord above the garage apartment. Apparently, the landlord's girlfriend had suddenly moved out, leaving the apartment vacant. Now, you would think that a nosy neighbor like that, monitoring our guests, would have chose nice safe people to live in the property with us, right? Wrong. That young couple definitely wreaked havoc, I'll tell you. At first, they got into the landlord's house while we were out to dinner one night. They stole what I assumed to be the landlord's cell phone from his living room, but it was actually my recently deceased mother's cell phone that I had lent to him, since the cell phone had about a year left on the contract agreement. Also, some of the last pictures of my mother and I were on that cell phone. I didn't actually find out that the cell phone was stolen until my boyfriend told me as soon as our landlord told him. I remember that I was out in my field doing some tracking for Peeping Tom, whole other story, when he came out to tell me. I immediately yanked my phone out of my pocket and called the stolen phone. A younger sounding girl answered, but hung up after hearing me ask, "Who is this?" We both left the other house right away and headed to our studio so I could confront the young couple at their apartment. My boyfriend and I quietly crept up the stairs in the garage that led up to their apartment. As I stood quietly outside the door's apartment, I texted the number of the phone that I thought they had stolen. I did this because a particular brand of phone had a certain text tone, exclusive to that type of phone only. And I knew that my mom had the phone set to that one text tone. Sure enough, I heard it go off inside their apartment. I calmly knocked on their door and waited for them to answer. When the young girl answered the door, I calmly asked her about the phone. Before she could answer me though, I explained that the phone that had been stolen was my mother's and she had just recently died. I also explained that the phone had a few of the last photos of my mom and I in it. She denied even having the phone, of course. For all of you that are reading this, I just have to say I tried, people. I tried, but I lost it right then. I yelled at her, "Bullshit, I just texted it before I knocked and I heard the fucking text tone on the phone go off in your apartment." My boyfriend was standing right behind me the whole time, trying to pull me back, as it was the landlord's house after all. As all this was going on, her boyfriend happened to walk into the living room area behind her, but as soon as he saw and heard me, he took off right back out of the area. She kept on denying it, and I was just getting angrier and angrier while yelling louder and louder. Eventually, my boyfriend had to basically pull me back down the stairs. Next, I called the cops since I had proof via the phone's location on the family's share map, proving where it was, and also my online account had all their phone activity recorded on it. The cops even sneaked up the stairs to listen for my phone while I texted and called it. As I found out from the officers that night, the couple's place was searchable because one of them being on parole and the other one on felony probation. Although they ended up searching for over an hour in the small apartment, they didn't get my phone back. I even told her to just email me the pictures from the phone of my mom and I, that she could just keep the phone and I wouldn't call the cops or do anything else to them. But no, I ended up with neither. The young couple didn't stop there though. Thanks neighbor lady, all taking pictures of my guest's license plate for security and saying that they were a risk. For their next performance, the young couple again broke into the landlord's house but stole his car keys and his car this time. Our landlord couldn't even drive himself, so that was the vehicle that we used to take him out and around. The landlord's car was gone for 4 days or so, and the cops eventually found it ditched in a nearby canyon. Since the landlord didn't have the phone, so he couldn't receive the call to inform him of the discovery of his car, they had to take it to the impound to store it, costing almost $3,000. After all that crap, I still had to live there part-time since my mom's house that I inherited had no kitchen due to renovations. During that time, the neighbor for some stupid reason let her huge German Shepherd out of its fenced area as soon as my 4-year-old son exited my car there. It was a new dog to her, so I was appalled when it came running up towards my son barking and growling. How would you know how the dog would react around strangers, let alone kids? Thankfully, I moved into my other house as soon as the renovations were done. After I moved out of that place and got away from her, my diarrhea stopped completely. The landlord even told me that she had calmed way down after I left, even though my boyfriend still lived there. Nice peaceful ending, right? Well, not the hell as far as I'm concerned. It wasn't, because one night, I got wild hair for some petty revenge. You see, there was a gate about halfway at the long, winding driveway. I had noticed that there was also a chain on the pole that the gate would close to, and it gave me an idea. I took an old combination lock that I had around the house and straight up locked her ass in the yard with a gate and the chain. Since the landlord couldn't drive himself out, I had already taken him into town to get everything he needed earlier that day. I knew that he'd be fine and well enough, plus I knew he would laugh his ass off when he heard of my little misdeed. I didn't get to see her stupid face when she realized that she couldn't leave for work the next morning, but I bet it was classic. From what I heard a little later, she reversed her car back the windy driveway to fume to her landlord after she first realized she was locked in. He said it was hilarious, by the way. Even more hilarious was the fact that it took her like 4 hours to get someone up there to cut off the lock so she could finally go to work. My life went back to normal after I moved out, thankfully. The only thing any of us could come up with was that she must have been jealous of me after the thing that her husband said about my body back when I was 16 years old. Either way though, that was definitely an experience. We moved into this house a few months before my younger sibling was born, and that was when we first met our neighbors across the street. Lucas, who was the oldest child in their family, was always a bit strange, but there were some aspects of his personality that were more than just strange. They were straight up disturbing. It would take hours to cover everything, so I'm just gonna get straight to the point. I'm almost positive Lucas has been inside our house in the middle of the night. Our house was built on a hill, so it looked like it was only 2 stories from the front, and the basement was connected to the backyard. The yards in this neighborhood were much larger than they are in the new housing developments, so it would have been very easy for someone to enter the backyard unnoticed. Despite this, my family was terrible about making sure the basement doors were locked. My younger siblings and I would always go in and out when we were playing in the backyard, or someone would let the dog out and we would end up forgetting to lock one of the doors before bed. We also lived in a safe area where it was more common for people to leave the doors unlocked. However, my family did always lock the door leading down to the basement every night, along with all the other doors on the main level of the house. I had a fucked up sleep schedule back then, so I'd usually still be awake at 3 or 4 in the morning. There are 2 specific incidents that happened very late at night, which makes me think that Lucas has been inside our house without our knowledge. One night, I was in my bedroom in the upper level of the house. It was probably around 2:30 in the morning. I suddenly heard the sound of an angry growl coming from downstairs. Thinking that my dog spotted a cat in the front yard, I quickly rushed downstairs to stop him from barking and waking up my entire family. This kind of thing would happen every now and then, so I wasn't thinking too much of it at the time. But instead of going downstairs and finding my dog in the front window, I found him by the locked door that leads down to the basement. The fur on his back of his neck was standing up, and his nose was pressed to the bottom of the door. I instantly froze when I realized what was happening. There was something or someone on the other side of that basement door. I was barely a teenager at the time, so I began to panic and started making my way up the stairs as quietly as possible. I woke up both of my parents, but neither of them took me very seriously. My dad just assumed that the dog was hearing random noises coming from outside, but he did eventually go down to check things out. He said that everything downstairs looked normal, but he also mentioned that we forgot to lock one of the basement doors that night. Then there was another time that I was up late at night in my room, but this time, instead of hearing my dog growling, I heard a loud bark that echoed through the entire house. The sound was sudden and intense, similar to a gunshot. It almost made me jump out of my chair. Assuming again that the dog had seen a cat outside, I quickly looked out my bedroom window and tried to spot whatever he was barking at. My heart suddenly dropped when, instead of seeing a cat, I saw Lucas running out of her front yard in the pitch black. I watched him cross the street and go back towards his own house before I rushed to close the curtains and duck out of sight. I remember sitting there struggling to process what I had just seen and questioning why Lucas would be in our yard in the middle of the night. I told my mom about it the very next morning, and she said that she would bring it up to Lucas's mom. Because of these two instances, and because of other details I can't include, I'm 99% sure that Lucas had been inside of our house in the middle of the night. If you knew the entire story behind this family, then you'd also find the thought of this to be extremely disturbing. I do want to mention that this happened years ago. My family no longer lives in that house, and the neighbors across the street are doing fine. But looking back on everything now, I'm realizing how creepy that situation truly was. I'm a 24-year-old male. Almost a year ago, I was fresh out of college and just moved into an apartment with my middle school bestie, 23 female, and her fiance, 25 male. This was after a long period of not seeing her in person. My bestie and I had a long and great relationship with few rocky periods. I didn't know her fiance well, but had met him a couple times. He came off as kind of rude and loud, but mostly nice enough. I let a lot of the little annoying behaviors slide because she was so in love with him. I really just wanted to spend time with my best friend. Over the course of a few months, I slowly discovered that she was trapped in an abusive relationship with the most classic example of a malignant narcissist imaginable. Their fights, really just him raging at her while she cried, escalated to the point where he was completely trashing the apartment, breaking her phone and laptop, hiding her car keys, blocking the door, and grabbing her arm so hard she had bruises, all while hurling out the worst insults he could fathom at the top of his lungs for hours. This man is about a foot taller and 100 pounds heavier than me, so there was nothing I could really do other than give her a ride somewhere else, away from him until the next day. He didn't like it when I did that. Once it reached the point of physical harm against her, I put my foot down and demanded that he move out or that I would call the cops. He wasn't technically signed to the lease, so I could have him kicked out. He begged me for time to find a new place. He was extremely drunk and high the night he hurt her and promised to stay sober until he moved out. Not wanting to escalate things, I agreed on the condition that nothing like that would ever happen again. My friend and her fiance broke up soon after that. 3 weeks passed and everything's going great. Ex-fiance has found a new place, is in training for a new job, and while he's still loud and inconsiderate, he hasn't caused any problems so far. I get ready for bed early. I had an important meeting the next morning. I put on some comfy pajamas, locking my door before I changed out of habit. My bestie is out working, and it's just me upstairs in bed, and ex-fiance is downstairs yelling on the phone about something. I tune him out and try to sleep. He's moving out the next week. My chest rattles from the booming footfalls up the stairs to my room, waking me from sleep. My eyes snap open to see the doorknob rattling back and forth, locked. He lets out a yell of pure malice and bangs on my door. He screams my name, and it's so slurred he sounds like he's trying to impersonate a lizard man. The hinges aren't looking so good. We live in a crappy cheap apartment with thin doors. I have to do something before he breaks open the door. I say the only thing I can think of. What the fuck? Suddenly the banging and screaming stops. My doorknob falls still. After a terrifying moment of silence, he says flatly, "Open the door, bud. Just come and open the door." I still laugh about that one. Like after all that, I'll just walk over and open the door. Instead, I just grabbed my essentials and jumped out the window. I was on the second floor, but we lived on a hill, so the fall wasn't quite so high. Still, managed to fall wrong. I hobbled quickly as I could to my car and peeled away. I called my best friend and warned her not to go home. We made plans for her to stay with a friend after she got off work. I made it to the friend's house and passed out for a few hours. I woke up from a call from my bestie. He traveled all the way to her workplace with a knife and broke in. He assaulted her and held a knife up to her special needs client's throat and said that he would kill him right in front of her. Thank God a coworker overheard everything in another room and was able to call the police in time for everyone to come out alive. My bestie also said that he was on the phone with her while he was banging on my door, and he said he was going to kill me and make her listen. I was totally alone in the apartment with him, sleeping upstairs in my bed. If I hadn't locked my door that night, would I even still be alive? If I had had my car keys downstairs, would I have been able to get away? When I returned to my apartment the next morning, my bedroom door was completely kicked in. My belongings were scattered everywhere, and the large butcher knives were missing from the kitchen, instead sitting in the corner of the hallway to my room. I'm a 20-year-old female. I recently moved into a new apartment with my boyfriend who works away for long periods of time. An older man, 50, started becoming friendly with me, knowing that I was new in the complex. I made the mistake of telling him I live with my partner, but he's away for work all the time. Almost every day after that, he'd come knocking on my door and would wait. If I didn't answer, he would leave after 5 minutes of knocking with no answer. One time, I was out in the common grass area playing with my little brother that I would occasionally have over. I saw him coming my way, and I quickly picked up my brother. The man started making conversation, asking about my brother, and literally tried to grab him out of my arms. I held onto my brother tight and pulled away. As he started to cry, I made the excuse that I had to go feed him, and then walked away. That was the last time I went near that man with my brother. I'm extremely bad with confrontation, as you can tell. A few days later, I heard a knock on my door and opened it without thinking. He walked straight past me into my apartment without even saying a word, just smiling. I asked him if he was doing okay. He said, "I'm good. Just wanted to see what your place looked like inside," and started walking into every room. He checked all the windows and said, "All your windows have bars on them, except your bathroom." I nervously laughed and said, "Yeah, I guess they do." I didn't know what to do, so I just walked out to the front garden, hoping that he would follow me out of the apartment and try to talk to me. I just wanted him out, but was scared to anger him. I could tell he didn't seem like he was right in the head. Once he came out of the front door, I closed my door and said, "I have to go to the shop now. Sorry, it's gonna close soon," and walked off. That night, while hanging my clothes up, another neighbor introduced herself, 34 female. I told her what happened and asked if she knew the man. Apparently, he had been doing the same exact thing to her. She told her partner that this creepy neighbor was doing the same thing to a young girl, me, and that was the last straw. He ended up going and talking to the older man. After that, the older man only tried one more time that I know of to knock on my door, which I hid in my kitchen for 10 minutes until he left. I haven't heard anything since and haven't seen him around, but I wake up at night panicking, thinking that he's planning on doing something to me. Edit, since there's too many comments for me to reply to. My windows are glass, so there's no way I can put a lock on it. And I talked to management, and there's nothing that they can do since he stopped now, apparently. I'm thinking of possibly filing a police report, so that it'll at least be on record. I'm a female, 22. I was parked on the side street of my house with my friend, 21 female. I lived next to a dead-end road. The road faces 2 other houses, and all my neighbors parked their cars there. My friend didn't want to be rude to my family and block them in, so she parked on the right side of the street, so it would be easier for her to drive out and go home. My neighbor has a trailer, the kind you hook up onto the back of your car. My friend lives with her parents and switches to the car that she uses pretty frequently. We were in her dad's old beater Toyota Camry. I didn't get out of the car immediately because I wanted to talk to her for a little bit before I went inside. All of a sudden, my neighbor, which I hadn't yet realized at the time was my neighbor, pulled up right next to our car. He got out of the car and started walking towards our car. I know that we made the wrong decision when this happened, but we were afraid. It was after dark and we're both girls, and he's a heavyset, bald, white man, just to give you a description. So my friend reversed to get out of there. Her intentions were to drive somewhere and wait 10 or more minutes before finally dropping me off, because she didn't want me walking inside alone while he was still out there. I agreed, so we turned the street to leave. That is not what happened. What did happen was right after we turned, we saw another car, and we just figured it was another car, until we realized it was the same guy in the truck. We proceeded to drive across the town trying to lose him. He honked his horn and turned his high beams at us, and was driving up our ass the whole time. My friend somehow managed not to drive recklessly the entire time this was happening. She's an incredibly skilled driver. We called the police soon after he started chasing us, and my friend started driving over to the police station while I was on the phone with the operator. We pulled into the parking lot of the police station and he followed us in. We proceeded to drive in circles around the parking lot. About 3 or 4 times he waited on the other side of the parking lot to try to hit us with his car. He did this until an officer showed up and blocked him in. Then we both parked and started to talk to the officer. Apparently, because we were in an old beater car and that we were parked behind his trailer, he was convinced that we were trying to steal stuff from him. He was still screaming when he was parked and the officer was talking to him. The officer told both of us it was a misunderstanding and told us to go home. We went back later with me and my friend's mother to the police station to ask about having officers patrol the area for a while. I'm currently in my house. This happened in the evening about 10 p.m.-ish. My neighbor got off with a warning and he's in the house next door. I don't think I'll be sleeping tonight. I know I can't really do anything because he lives next door. I'm afraid to press charges in case he gets violent. I don't know if he actually thought we were going to steal from him, or he's on drugs, or just crazy. But yeah, that's my neighbor, and I hope I don't have the misfortune to ever run into him again. I'm a female, 45. This story happened many years ago when I was around 8 or 9. My parents and I lived in a very beautiful, big old house that used to be a hotel in the 19th century. The house had 4 extra apartments, and in one of them lived a middle-aged guy, who we'll call F. The house was placed on a very small but long road that went in between fields and a small forest, all of it going downhill before it ended right by the beach. There were maybe 15 houses and only one kid my age, so I'd sometimes visit with the adults in the area. There were a few incidents with F, the guy who rented one of the apartments. The first one happened to be when my friend and I were roller skating, and we met F, who was out on his bicycle. We asked him if he would tow us, because we were tired, and he let us hold on his bike. At first we thought he was great, because not all adults would have been okay with that idea. But the ride didn't go very well. Once we held onto the bike, he started going faster and faster, and I mean really fast. It was summertime, and we only had on skirts or shorts, and back then we didn't have a lot of protective gear, so we absolutely didn't want to fall down. We started out by politely asking him to go slower, but he didn't listen at all. Then we started getting near a really big hill, where gravity would always make you go way too fast, so we would always zigzag our way down to make it down safely. At this point we were screaming at him to stop, but he did the opposite. He started standing up on his bike so he could go even faster, and then he told us to let go of the bicycle if we didn't like it, but there was no way we could have done that without falling, and he knew that. Even if he didn't know, he could clearly hear the fear in our voices. But he didn't stop before we were a good bit past the hill, and that's when we confronted him afterwards. He said he only did what we wanted him to do, and that was our own fault. The second incident is the real creepy encounter that I had with this guy. By the time I just thought it was a bit weird. My mom, on the other hand, got really mad, and as an adult I now understand why. I had met F in the driveway, and he invited me in to get a cup of tea. I remember sitting on his couch and not liking the tea because it had no sugar. When I asked for some, he refused to give me any. Maybe he said he didn't have any, but anyway, I didn't like the tea, and he kind of forced me to drink it anyway, saying how I was the one who wanted it, and he went through the trouble of making it, and so on. He got kind of mad, so I did what he told me, because he was an adult and I was only a child. That evening I told my mom, and she right away took the phone and called him. Then she yelled at him for endangering us girls while we were roller skating, and got even more angry when she told him to never invite me into his apartment, and especially to never force a little girl to do anything. This could have been the end of the story, but I actually met another guy about 10 years later, and he told me that F had informed him that I was the kind of girl that just needed to be cornered and pressured a bit, and then I would put out. Yikes. A couple of weeks ago, someone had dropped off groceries at my door with 2 coffees. The groceries were odd. Had lubricant, lollipops, not your normal grocery shop. I thought it was delivered to the wrong apartment, and as there was no receipt on confirmation in the bag, I left it in the lobby, but no one claimed it. A week later, a letter was slipped under the door with $200 in it. The letter was from a man talking about his recent hardship and how he'd like to talk and hear my voice. Again, I was a little naive, so I took the note to the building manager, thinking that it was meant for someone else. He thought it was so strange. He called the number on the letter, and it turns out it was the man in the building next door saying he wants to be friends. The buildings are really close together, and you can see into my apartment if the blinds are open. My building manager told him to leave me alone and to stay out of the building. I thought it was over, but today I heard someone pacing in the hallway outside my apartment for a couple minutes. I went to leave an hour later and there's this coin in front of my door, dead center, like it had been placed there. The only way it could get there would be if it was placed there, or if my neighbor dropped it, as my neighbor should be the only person that walks past my door. But based on where I found it, it makes me feel like it was deliberately placed there. I wouldn't think twice about the coin, but with what's been happening, it's making me really anxious. Update. 2 days after the coin incident, I left my apartment and a man in his 60s or 70s approached me, straight away telling me that he's selling his car and if I would like to take a look at it. So I have a number plate and will be reporting it to the police. I'm a 26-year-old female. I recently moved into an apartment with my boyfriend, 27 male. We instantly fell in love with the place and the price. We got approved and moved in rather quickly. The place is in a college town area. There is a bar nearby, grocery stores, and fast food places. Nothing out of the ordinary or sketchy. On the day that we moved in, our landlord gave us a key and briefed us on our neighbors. There were only 4 apartments in the complex. The landlord said they were all very reserved for the most part. One neighbor is very scared of COVID-19, so they stay inside. The neighbor across from us seems to be very reserved as well. Now, I saved the best for last. Our bottom floor neighbor, let's call him Cal. As we were walking up towards our place, our landlord said, "Oh yeah, that's Cal. He is very weird." My boyfriend and I looked at each other, like what the fuck does that mean? His windows and doors were wide open. The landlord explained that they did not have AC at the moment. We ignored it and continued unpacking. We had prior plans to leave town, so we did not spend the first few nights there. Upon arrival, we discovered why he was weird. When we first saw him, we said hello and made some comment about the weather. He seemed confused or disoriented and said, yeah, okay. As the days passed, we would say hi. He would say hi back at times. It was obvious that he was socially awkward. If I pulled into my parking lot and he saw me, he would scurry into his room. I thought it was unusual but brushed it off. We thought that was the extent of him being weird. But boy, were we fucking wrong. Slamming, shoving, and hitting his own door started at night. Only at night. The slamming and banging was so loud that it woke us up. When we got closer to our door, We heard him yelling. We finally understood why he was deemed weird. This continued for many nights in a row. We would notice that he would just stand in the middle of the parking lot and talk to himself, and if he sees me, he goes back inside. Things escalated the past week. It was late in the evening. We were chilling watching TV when we heard a knock. We immediately knew who it was, since Cal was chilling outside with the neighbors. My boyfriend answered the door and Cal asked if we had seen a young Asian woman walking around. My boyfriend said no, and he just walked away. Last night, I came back home from visiting family. Immediately after I came home, Cal went upstairs. When my boyfriend answered the door, Cal asked if we had seen his mom walking around. My boyfriend sternly said no and closed the door. To conclude, this morning at 6 a.m., we heard an extremely loud knock. I woke up immediately. I went to the door and did not see anyone, though I saw a flashlight. I got super scared and woke my boyfriend up. We looked out and saw that there was a police officer looking for Cal. From what we could make out, Cal called the police due to hearing a gunshot and a young woman scream. My boyfriend had been up since 5 a.m. and stated that he didn't hear any of that. At this point, we were on edge with this dude. If he comes upstairs again, we are going to tell him to ask the other neighbors. Update. Right after I finished typing this, the previous tenant texted me. He stated that Cal was really weird while they lived there. Cal would talk to himself. He caught security camera footage of Cal going up the stairs near the door and started working out. Cal noticed the cameras and went back downstairs. We will be installing cameras very soon. My boyfriend is officially in I wish a motherfucker would mode. I forgot to mention, before I visited my family, I heard someone yell hello and shuffle around my front door. I can only imagine who it was. It creeped me out because it was right after my boyfriend left to go golfing. Also, my boyfriend told me they heard Cal go up the stairs after the police left at 6 a.m. and say hello, trying to get someone's attention. I mentioned this in the comments, but my plan is to call the non-emergent police line in the event he continues to be erratic towards myself or us. I really hope it does not get to that point. I know this man is mentally ill. However, it does not negate the fact that he purposely tries to talk to us in the late hours of night. Compassion is shown, but boundaries will be set. I wish him the best, but our safety, including his, is prudent. Last update. The police were called because we heard him yell and scream for help. The police came out and said they already knew about him. It seems like he's harmless, but we're still keeping our distance for our safety and his. I'm a young guy with a nighttime job living in an area of town that has gotten pretty sketchy the past decade or so. The police are here almost once a month to sort out some kind of violent or drug-related crime. I'm a very routine-focused person, so for the past 8 years I've been going to work at 1:30 a.m. I always take my dog out for a walk at 1 a.m. In fall of last year, I went for a routine dog walk one misty night at 1 a.m. like I usually do. I made a right turn after exiting the gate, and just as I passed the corner of my apartment building, I noticed a fuzzy shape on the ground outside the gate of the neighboring building. I stopped in my tracks and took in what I was looking at. I determined it was just a cat laying on its side on the pavement. I thought this was odd, but since I knew my dog would most certainly bark at it and wake up the entire neighborhood, I chose to turn around and take a different route for the walk than usual. For the rest of this walk, I was reflecting on that cat. There was something very off about the cat just laying relaxing on the ground in the middle of the night with no people around. Once my walk had looped back to the gate, I decided to take the corner again to see if the cat was still there. Mind you, a full 15 minutes had gone by at this point. Sure enough, it was still there, same position and everything. Now I thought the scene was even more odd. I took my dog up to the apartment, put my work clothes on, grabbed my car keys and headed out. As I exited the elevator, The image of the relaxed cat laying outside was still in the back of my mind, perplexing me. Instead of going into the underground garage, I decided to instead go out to the main gate one last time and check if the cat was still there. I exited, turned the corner once again. The cat was still laying there. Since my dog wasn't with me this time, I just approached it to check if the cat was okay. When I got to it and looked down, I stared at it for a good while. The cat wasn't breathing at all. It was dead. No question about it. I had my suspicions that might be the case, so I wasn't extremely shocked. But something was still off about it. A cat wouldn't just lay in the middle of the paved sidewalk to die of natural causes. There was no noticeable blood on or around it, so I began thinking that the cat might have jumped off from one of the balconies. Just as that thought hit me, a raspy voice spoke to me from above. "Yep, there she is." The voice said in a very matter-of-fact type of tone. Quickly glanced up. Through the mist I saw a middle-aged woman on the 5th floor balcony leaning over the railing, looking down at me with a lit cigarette in her hand. When our eyes met, a cold shiver shot through the top of my scalp all the way down to my toes in an instant. I may have misinterpreted her facial expressions due to the fog, but I could swear that she was smiling when our eyes met. Without responding, I immediately turned and quickly walked to the gate. As I walked, I could hear her laughing. I practically sprinted to my car in the garage. Once I sat down inside, I considered whether I should call the police or not, as every aspect of what I just witnessed gave me the impression that the neighbor of mine had killed the cat. I dialed the number but decided not to, as they may want me to stick around for questioning, which would make me late for work. So I went on with my night as usual, doing my best to forget the incident for now. When I got home later, the cat wasn't there anymore. About a week later, I walked past a neighbor living in the same building as me. We had some usual neighborly small talk, but she interrupted herself to ask me whether I heard what happened in the other building last week. I said I didn't. She told me that a woman on the 5th floor had thrown her cat from the balcony in rage because it peed on her living room carpet. The cat apparently did not die immediately, but all its legs were broken from the impact with the concrete pavement. Police were called around 5 a.m. when another dog walker saw the cat. The woman had still been out on the balcony at this point, talking to the guy while he called the police. I believe the woman's other cats were taken away from her, and she was fined thousands of dollars. She still lives there, and I sometimes see her leaning over the balcony railing when I'm walking my dog. I never interacted with her after that, and I sincerely hope that she never speaks to me again. I grew up in Arizona in a relatively safe city. Before myself or any of my friends had a driver's license, we would walk everywhere just to get out of the house and do something. Typically going to Circle K for soda and snacks, or Walmart and Target to just browse around. One time when two friends and I were 15, we were walking back to her house through her neighborhood around sunset. At the time, everyone in Arizona was fairly friendly, so whenever you would pass by another person or group, you would exchange a hello or wave. This time in particular, we were walking past a house on the corner that had the kitchen light on, where a middle-aged man was washing the dishes. When he made eye contact with us, my natural instinct was to smile, and my friend's was to wave. What a bad idea. The man immediately dropped his dishes in the sink, and what felt like 1 second later was outside on the corner staring at us in an aggressive stance with both hands balled into fists. All of our flight or fight responses were completely different. One friend immediately took off running in the other direction. My other friend peed her pants, and I was frozen in complete fear. He started charging towards us in force, and I'm so grateful that my friend grabbed my arm, and we started running as fast as we could. I was so scared. I was last in place. The man was well built and appeared to be in shape and had no troubles catching up to us. As I'm running, I hear his footsteps very close behind me. He reached out his hand and tried to grab a hold of my hair, but my adrenaline finally kicked in, and I was able to speed off beyond his grip. After a while of running, we realized we were no longer being chased. We hid in safety and called my friend's mom to pick us up and told her what happened. We gave her the location of the house and all vowed never to go near the house again. The next morning, we wake up and Mom explains she checked the address of the house and someone living there was a registered sex offender. Not sure if it was because of this incident, but my friend moved houses shortly after this. Our moms all collectively agreed we were not allowed to walk alone around anyone's neighborhood and that if we wanted to go out, a parent should be close by. I completely forgot about this until I recently was talking to my friend and she brought it up that night. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if the man got a better grip on my hair, but I'm thankful that we got away unharmed. At 27 today, I carry a pocket knife and pepper spray with me at all times. This happened around summer 2000 in Midwest United States. I was a 12-year-old boy. I was shy and never did well with confrontation. Anytime I was scared, I'd feel myself shaking. One day, my dad and cousins were weightlifting in the garage and it was open. I decided to grab my bike out of the garage and ride up and down the street while my dad and cousins lifted. As I'm pedaling away from my house, I see another kid riding his bike probably about 5 to 6 houses down from mine, but he's kinda going in circles. I maybe get like 20 feet near him, but that's it. No words were exchanged, not even a wave or nod. I just kept my head down and kept pedaling. On my next circle back down the street, that's when things got weird. I get near the area where the kid had been riding, but he's not there anymore. So I guess he just went inside, wherever he lived. Right as I'm about to turn around and head towards my house, which is probably about 80 to 100 yards away, I hear a man yell, "Hey," in an unsettling tone. I look up and a man is standing at his front door, probably 25 feet away from me, as I'm paused on the street with my bike. He's one of the creepiest looking dudes I've ever seen in my life. He has on a ball cap and is wearing one of those Jeffrey Dahmer looking glasses. He had tan, burnt orange, dirty looking, wrinkly skin, and had to be in his 40s. He looked straight out of a horror movie and just had this sinister, angry look on his face. He then says, "If you say anything to my son again, I'm gonna run your ass over." At this point, I was crying and frozen in fear, but then I started biking home faster than ever. I'd never been in a situation like this in my life. I couldn't believe what happened because I never said anything to the boy. So I get to the open garage where my dad and cousins are still lifting, tell them the story, and then they decide to go to this guy's house and address the situation that had just occurred. My dad and cousins had a few beers and were pretty jacked, so they were ready for a tussle if needed. My dad goes straight to the guy's door with my cousin behind him and knocks loudly. The man opens the door and has this huge Rottweiler by his side barking and going crazy at my dad and cousins. He threatens to let the dogs loose, but my dad and cousins aren't cowering one bit. After a bit of bickering for a minute, the guy goes inside his house and shuts the door. Nothing else happens that night, and we walk back home. A few days pass, and now I'm about to get to the creepiest part. During the summer, when my parents worked during the day, my grandma would come over and babysit my little brother and I. We were about 10 minutes from downtown, and my grandma was going to take us to grab food at Sonic. We get into the car and start driving down the road towards the creepy dude's house. This made me feel uneasy, but that's the direction we had to go. As we get closer to the house, the hairs on the back of my neck start to stand up. As we go by the house, I see him. He is sitting in his red truck in the driveway, facing the road like he's about to pull out. I don't remember well, but I think he might have even had a grin on his face when we drove by. We pass the house and he pulls out behind us. I start freaking out a bit, so I tell my grandma the story about the man driving behind us. At first, my grandma is chill about it, but then I notice she seems to be shaken. This is because she had made about 6 to 7 turns to throw him off our trail, but he kept following us, every little turn. At this point, me and my brother are in the back seat with our heads down as he follows us. But luckily, we made it downtown where it was busy. We get near the police station, I believe, and take another turn. Then he finally passes by. I never saw the man again. My mom and dad split up, and we left that neighborhood about 2 years later when my mom moved to the country. My dad still lives in the same house, and I wonder if that dude stuck around for a while or even still lives at the house. What was his intent? Was it just a coincidence, or did he plan on following us? It was so weird how it looked like he was just waiting in his driveway for us to pass by. I'm 21, male, and my girlfriend is 20, female. We rented an apartment for a month. The area was secluded, and after dark, everyone would mind their own business. Neighbors would hardly talk to each other, or even be outside in the evening. Our apartment was a building with 4 floors, and each floor had a single apartment. All the apartments were very compact and built to be rented to students. The night we moved in, our taps ran out of water, so I went upstairs hoping to borrow some from the people living upstairs. I realized that 2 out of the 4 apartments were vacant and locked. The apartment on the 4th floor was lit from the inside, so I decided to ring the bell, but to my disappointment, nobody answered. Over the next week, we used to hear the sound of someone whacking a rod or some sort of metal on maybe the floor or some other object. This would start late at night, after 1 a.m., and continue for hours. Initially, we didn't care about it, but after some time, it got us intrigued. The sound was clearly coming from one of the apartments above us, but as I already mentioned, 2 of the 3 were vacant, for sure, and the 3rd one seemed vacant, but was lit from the inside. I knocked on this door many times, but no one ever answered. The whacking sound was a daily occurrence, and on some very late nights, we could hear someone climbing the building stairs. It seemed as if we were the only one living in the building, especially during the day, until the very late nights. We made up theories to convince ourselves that it was just nothing, but the pattern of the whacking was too irregular for it to be made from wind or something other than a person. It would start almost daily around the same time. We asked people around, but didn't get a satisfactory answer. No one knew if anyone lived there. Towards the end of our stay, I saw a shady-looking man going upstairs during the day. I asked him if he was the owner of the apartments upstairs. He said he was, also including the one on the 4th floor. I asked him if anyone lived upstairs and also about the whacking sound. He told me that no one did and that he's looking for tenants. He said he had no idea about the sound. To my surprise, he then asked me, "So for how long are you going to stay here?" "4 more days. We leave on the 30th of this month." He asked me if anyone else had rented the place for the next month, and I told him that I didn't know. So the strangest part is that the next 4 days, there was neither the whacking sound nor the sound of someone climbing the stairs late at night. However, my girlfriend's internship got extended by 2 days, and we decided to stay there. And just as I anticipated, the whacking sound resumed on the 30th, the day we were supposed to leave. I don't know what it was, and I won't ever know. It really scared me sometimes, and feels weird thinking about it even now. So this happened quite a long time ago, when I was just 20 years old. At the time, I was living alone in an apartment in a notorious building near the center of the main city. It was a Saturday night, and I had just been going out with friends and my now partner. Because it was past 4 a.m. already, he and his friends drove me and my close friends back to our building. She lived near me, so she only had to walk about 1 minute home, but it was difficult to get to by car. We said our goodbyes and my friend started walking towards her place, while his friends stayed in the car. We made out for a few minutes until some guy started hollering from one of the balconies of my building. I felt a little embarrassed, so for me, that was the cue to say goodbye and go inside. I walked to the entrance, and as I entered the building, a guy walked downstairs. So I just simply pressed the button of the elevator because I didn't feel like taking the stairs to the 6th floor. The man, maybe a few years older than me, asked if I had a cigarette. I told him, "No, sorry," to keep it short and simple. He just nodded, kept staring at me, and stood next to me waiting for the elevator. I felt creeped out by this, but decided to still wait for the elevator and just get home as fast as possible. At this point, I naively thought that maybe he would just leave once the elevator arrived. However, he didn't. Once the elevator doors opened, he stepped in and just waited for me. I got inside the elevator and noticed he didn't press any buttons. I got a weird feeling, so I excused myself and told him I needed to call a friend. He grabbed my arm and tried to pull me back into the elevator, saying, No, come here." I told him louder, "Let go, I really need to make this call." and pulled my arm hard to free myself. I almost ran outside but didn't know where to go. I was afraid to go back inside, but it was so late, so I didn't feel safe outside either. I just started walking around the complex and called my friend. She asked me where I was so that she could come to me, but her phone died before I could answer. I didn't know my partner well back then, so I felt really uncomfortable and almost embarrassed to reach out to him, but I did anyways. The need to get somewhere safe was bigger than my embarrassment, and I don't know anyone else that would still be up this late at night. I texted him, and once he got to know what was going on, he and his friends came racing towards me. They were there within 5 minutes, parked the car and escorted me back home. By the time I got back in the building, the guy was nowhere to be found. They still decided to escort me back to my apartment and stayed with me for a while until the sun came up and I felt comfortable enough to go to sleep. I had 3 locks on my doors, so as soon as they left, I locked myself in and went to sleep. I reported to my landlord, but he couldn't help much since the security cameras often didn't work and happened to be offline that evening. I told them about the guys on the balcony as well, because I didn't know if it was one of them and therefore saw me going back alone. But the landlord told me that no one with a description lived on that side of the floor. Looking back, I am so grateful I trusted my gut instinct and just got the hell out of there. I don't know if he would have done anything, but it was a weird situation regardless, and it could have ended badly. My last post was about someone making a scene at night, and I was worried because I was by myself, but I have another story when I was with my brother. I was around 20 to 21 and he was 18 or 19. Our friends lived in a single-story complex that used to be a Motel 8 and was converted into apartment buildings. Picture a horseshoe-like parking lot with maybe 20 units. My brother and I parked directly in front of the unit and left around 12 a.m. We never done drugs and we're just silly kids hanging out with other silly kids. As we pulled out, someone ran in front of my car and asked me for a ride to the closest gas station. We apologized and told them that we couldn't take him. I looked at my brother, who was in the passenger seat, and asked him what we should do. He's a fighter, but even this situation made him uncomfortable. He basically told me, hit the gas and get the fuck out of there. There was a stop sign at the end of the parking lot, and the guy just jumped on my hood. My brother told me, fuck the stop sign, go! As soon as I accelerated, the guy jumped off my hood and chased us, yelling obscenities. We called our friend on the ride home and told him that his neighbor was insane. This guy was higher than a kite and definitely scared the shit out of 2 young people. This happened over a decade ago, and I told my boyfriend at the time and my parents. My ex-boyfriend lived in a multi-level apartment with his mom and aunt. We were both around 20 to 22. I entered the gate code and started driving 5 miles per hour towards the back of the apartments, as that's where he lived. While I was creeping a few miles per hour, a man ran out in front of my car and started waving his arms above his head, yelling and making a scene. I'm a 100-pound, 5'2" female, so I didn't want to roll down my windows or ask what was wrong. I drove around him because he was in the apartment parking lot and he half jogged after my car. Luckily, the complex was large, so by the time I parked, he was gone. I was scared shitless and called my ex to meet me at my car before I unlocked it. I don't know if someone was in trouble or if it was someone seeing meth monsters. Either way, it made me uncomfortable and I was shaking when I parked. Hi, my name is Addie. I've been listening to some podcasts. This is why I'm here, and it's my first time posting here. For introduction, this story happened in 2019. My sister and I were international students in Sydney, Australia. As we were on a tight budget, we rented a room for 4 months. The house had 3 bedrooms. All rooms have no locks, with a shared toilet and shower. The first room was occupied by the brother of the owner of the house. Let's call him D. D was in his early 40s, about 5'11", brown skin, and an average body type. The second room was occupied by D's friend. Let's call him F. F was in his early 60s. He's probably 6'1", with an average body type 2. Then lastly, me and my sister shared a room. It's not really a big deal since we're very close, and as I mentioned, we're on a tight budget. We knew D as he was a friend's friend of my aunt. Here's the story. I arrived from work, rest for a bit, then go shower. It was probably around 7-ish, and since it was winter, it was pitch black outside. When you enter the shower, on the right side has a big sliding glass window painted with white so no one could see inside unless you open the window. Behind the window was our backyard with table and chairs. So I went for a shower and noticed the window was slightly opened, like just a little bit. I didn't give it much attention as I'm thinking I can't be seen from outside as it's only a very small opening. So I finished my shower and just go into the kitchen to get some food. Then D came in from the backyard with his dog. I said hi and continued what I'm doing. Months passed. Me and my sister were studying and working, so most of the time we were not home during the day and just using the room to sleep at night. One time my sister has a late night afternoon shift, which was not her typical schedule as she always worked the early morning shift. I left for work and my sister was still sleeping, covered with blankets all over her body since it was winter. We have the same body type, 5 foot and petite, so sometimes you can't tell if someone's under the blanket or it might just be a pillow. My sister wakes up as she hears some noises happening around the room. She then opens her eyes and saw that some of her panties were scattered around the floor. She thinks that I might have just been running late and threw everything on the floor. She then saw housemate F searching our laundry basket and looking for something. Then she saw F sniffing our panties. She was horrified and scared as F is a big man. My sister pretended that she didn't see anything and asked F if he was looking for a charger. F was so shocked to see that my sister was in our bed. He said, yes, that he was indeed looking for a charger. After how many minutes, F went back to our room again and asked my sister not to tell anyone what happened earlier. My sister disagreed as she was afraid that F might do something bad to her. She went to work and texted me what happened. I was so shocked and afraid to go home because I'm the one who usually gets home first. My sister then told D what happened. I didn't go inside the house without D, I just waited outside for him. We went inside without any conversation, but D installed a lock on our door that night. After that happened, my sister and I moved after a week, but before we moved out, I was folding our clothes and I remember I still have some clothes hanging outside in the backyard. It was pitch black, but when my eyes adjusted to the dark, I get our clothes. My eyes move to the shower and I see a very small opening. To my shock, when you're outside, even that very small opening, you can see everything inside the shower. That is why D usually went outside in our dark backyard, because he could see everything inside the shower without you noticing him since it was pitch dark outside. This is a true frightening story that occurred more than a decade ago when I was about to head into my teenage years. My friend and I were wandering around the neighborhood that I was living in, as we always did. We strayed several blocks from the house we were staying at when 2 dogs started barking up a storm at us as we passed their house. They were pit bulls. The dogs started digging the ground under their fence. We could tell that the dogs were about to break out, so my friend and I started running. As we saw the dogs get under the gate and start coming at us, we went into this person's yard and shimmied up a tree which had branches for us to get up on. The dogs are now on the base of the tree barking, which made the owner of the yard come outside and shoo the dogs away. As we were still in the tree, this owner, which looked about 50 years old, started to tell us to get into his garage so he could keep us safe. My friend and I looked at each other, knowing between our eyes this was dangerous. We proceeded to tell him that we were okay and we were going to head home. But he was at the base of the tree at this point, attempting to coax us into letting him help us down. The tone and mannerisms of this guy were sinister, and even as young boys we could tell that he was a predator. This man kept looking back and forth on the street to make sure that no one was coming down, but eventually someone walking their dog down the road came along, and I said that it was my relative. We jumped down. As the man backed up, we ran up to the person like we knew them. I always wondered what would have happened if we would have let him keep us safe. I'm a 25-year-old male. I was leaving my apartment, and as I was backing up, there was this guy in the car next to me. The car was backed in, and I was pulling out so I could see the driver clearly, and he was just staring at me. He looked away and looked back, and he didn't break eye contact. I waited for like 20 seconds and just stared back at him. After that, I rolled down my window and asked him what's wrong. He said, "Huh?" I asked him, "Why are you staring at me?" He said, "Because you're staring at me." I said, "No, you were looking at me first, and I've never seen you before." He just started slowly shaking his head and did not break eye contact. I said, "Are you good?" And he didn't say a word. I started to drive away slowly, and he got out of his car and just watched me drive off. This guy is my neighbor's boyfriend, and I'm not sure what to do. I have no issues with him, but now I feel very uncomfortable, and I don't know what to do the next time I see him. Am I just overreacting, or should I be worried? Please give me any advice you can. For a little setup, I was a petite, 4'10", 13-year-old girl when this happened. My friends, Danny, who was a couple months older than me, so was also 13 at the time, but he was a bit taller guy for our age group, and Sam, he was 15, shorter than Danny, but as a whole we were just an innocent group. Several years ago, my friend Danny, Sam, and I were walking our area. We used to hang out all the time before Danny and I moved away. We lived in an area with canals, and we had never walked them before the day that prefaces this situation. We had gone out on that day, as normal. I decided we should walk the canals, just hang out and goof around. The canals are positioned so they are the backyard of these sort of apartment buildings. The buildings themselves are 1 story tall and are all in a row. They have a parking lot, and then 2 or 3 more rows of buildings. The houses were also pushed close together, and some are attached to each other. They also have green rooms in the back that had like screen walls. We had started from the bridge and went over to the canal and walked all the way to the end. The woman that lived at the building at the end came out and chatted with us. She was the older lady and told us we could hang out in her backyard anytime and offered us money to do yard work for her. She told us to knock on her door when we came over just to let her know. So we went back maybe 2 days later. We knocked and she didn't answer. So we went to her backyard to chill. At some point I suggested that maybe she didn't hear us knock and went back to the front. We sent Sam up and made him knock. The nice lady's neighbor had poked his head out the window's curtains. Sam and I both saw him and turned to look. I had barely managed to get a good look at him when Danny said, "We need to go to the backyard now." So the 3 of us went to the backyard. Before either of us could ask what was up, Danny said something along the lines of, "That guy had a gun." So we all began to panic. I myself had seen a dark object in his hand, but I thought it was a TV remote. Halfway through our talk about what to do, the guy went and sat in his green room. So we were in view. He still had the gun with him. We went to the side of the lady's house to try to figure out what to do. At some point, we decided leaving was the best decision, so we left. We had scooters with us and took off across the parking lot. On our way out, we were crossing the lot and a car almost hit me. I'm not going to describe the car in detail because I can't really remember. It was silver. This car pulled up to the guy's house, and that was all I saw before I turned the corner, and we were taking off towards the church we frequented. We turned into the church's parking lot and went to the back. We kept checking around the corner of the building, and we saw the silver car drive by maybe 5 times. It was definitely the same car. I very vividly remember seeing the same make and model drive by. The first time could have been a coincidence, but you don't see the same car drive by 5 times without it being suspicious. Trigger warning for this story. So I was stupid and went to an acquaintance friend's apartment that was technically a neighbor. I walked in and immediately noticed all the smoke in the air and a little boy sitting on the couch in the midst of it. The acquaintance of mine, I'll call L, and the dad, R, start smoking illegal substances, and I was immediately uncomfortable. This was right in front of a child. R hit the kid a couple times, and I said, "Please don't do that." He laughed at me. I spent some time with the boy. He was excited to show me his toys and stuff. I had to get out of there, and the boy grabbed my hand and begged me not to leave. I told him I'll be back. I feel so bad for lying. I got home and told a couple of people, and they told me to stay out of it, but I just can't. I reported it to a child abuse hotline. I'm afraid of the repercussions because it's obvious it was me who told. I'm so sick about it, I can't sleep. Edit. Thank you all so much for the support, it means a whole lot. I'm afraid, but I feel so much better with you backing me. R also called the boy horrible names. Like some of you mentioned, it's probably much worse when they're alone. I will pursue my call and make sure the boy is helped. Just know that I appreciate all the comments so much. Edit 2. It was meth, not weed. The smoke in the air was weed, but they started smoking meth, which was what I was referring to. One morning my husband went to take out the trash, and when he came back he said that some kids were staring into our yard. I thought it was weird, but eventually forgot about it, until I went outside to go up to our upstairs neighbor's house. This 16 to 18-year-old boy was literally standing on something looking over the fence. I got really freaked out, but just went upstairs and knocked on my neighbor's door. She didn't answer. When I turned around I saw him just standing there staring at me through the window. I kind of froze and just stared back. After about a minute he sat down. Now every time I look over that window he's at the fence just staring into our backyard. It's been hours. I'm not sure if I'm overreacting, but it's just odd. Trigger warning for this story. It's a good story, but it might get uncomfortable, as it was a little uncomfortable to read. When I was in 1st through 2nd grade, the neighbors at the end of the block terrorized my family, and their son terrorized our next door neighbors. They were a family we were really close with. I'll start with that first. Junior, the teenage psychopath, was friends with their son, who was the same age. My brother and I were always there playing with their daughter, who was my age. Our moms were very close. The mom was Maria, and she was very pretty. One day, her son told us that he was going to kill Junior. Maria told my mom that Junior had been peeping into her windows. She decided to film to get evidence because she kept finding something white on her windows. She found out Junior was masturbating to her undressing. He would then wipe his semen on her windows. This was before our family had problems with his family. One day, my dad, an avid cyclist, noticed his very expensive bike missing. He saw Junior riding it around the neighborhood. He had stolen it out of our garage. My dad went to his father and told him to get his son off his bike and give it back. His father yelled at my dad and denied Junior stole anything. Luckily, he left the bike in the driveway, and my dad took it back and kept it in the basement. A few days later, someone knocked on our back door, and my dad looked outside to see a plate of rice with a dead crow on it. He called the police, but since he didn't see who did it, they couldn't do anything. Trigger warning for this next part. When we would go out, we would leave our bunny and guinea pig in their cage outside to get fresh air. My mom, brother, and I were only out for a short period of time, and my dad was in the basement. When we got home, we went straight to the backyard that had a fence and big bushes in the back. Our kiddie pool had been out, and this is what we found. Our bunny had been drowned in the pool, and our guinea pig was thrown over the extremely high bushes into the alley. It was devastating. Piglet, our guinea pig, was still alive, and my mom took her to the animal hospital. She had severe internal bleeding and her bones were broken. She had to be put to sleep. I can't believe the cruelty all over my dad confronting Junior's dad over the bike. My mom went over to their house and confronted the father. He readily admitted doing it, saying that they were just animals. He did it with a friend. I can't remember how my parents figured that out. I think Maria's mother saw them in our backyard. The police were called, but nothing happened. That wasn't the end though. One night, I woke up to my dog Wrinkles going crazy. She was sleeping on my bed. My bed faces my window. Then I heard knocking, and also I heard a male's voice saying something about coming in. He also called me a son of a bitch, and I also heard motherfucker. Then I saw Junior. I ran to my parents' room crying hysterically, saying that someone was trying to get into my room. My dad went outside and saw one of our patio chairs outside of my very open window. He called the police. They searched outside my window and saw shoe prints. The cops thought that there might be two people because they saw two shoe prints on the ground. I bet they were in the house, but the police couldn't search it. I was traumatized afterwards, and my bed was moved so I couldn't see the windows. I was terrified to be home at night. My parents bought lights that you could run along the entire house and all around the patio to my windows. I was still afraid at night if my blinds were left open. Nothing happened to Junior since there was no evidence it was him. Plus, someone in his family was a cop. It explains why he wasn't sent to jail for what he did to Maria, who actually caught it on camera. I also forgot to mention that my mom was talking to his mom before any of this started, and she referred to her husband as the man. She hated him and joked about poisoning his food. He actually died of a heart attack shortly after Junior tried climbing in my window. We always thought that she finally poisoned him. Trigger warning for this story. I'm 19 and I'm a guy, so I've never been in such a weird and uncomfortable situation like this before. I'm not gay and I have nothing against gay people. However, I thought this encounter was completely weird and inappropriate. My neighbor lives with his wife next door, and he's always outside chatting with the other neighbors. Very popular in the neighborhood, and he gives everyone free beer and cuts people's grass for free, so I just figured he was a really nice guy. Yesterday, his wife wasn't there, and he asked me if I could help him connect his VCR to his smart TV. I figured why not? As soon as I stepped inside, I immediately noticed he was really drunk. He kept hugging me, telling me I have a nice body, calling me handsome and touching my chest, face, and arms in a nonchalant way, playing it off as him being really friendly. It made me uncomfortable, but I figured he was senile or something. He kept trying to make conversation and was telling me we should go to the movies sometimes and be friends, telling me about projects around the house that he wanted me to do for money and just other really awkward shit. As I was threading the HDMI cable through the back of the TV stand, I told him that the cable might not be long enough, and he said under his breath, "Just like that hard cock of yours." I was so caught off guard that I just pretended I didn't hear him. I've been to this guy's house before and chatted with him, but he's never once acted like that towards me, so I was just in shock. His wife was always there though, so I guess that might be why he's never tried anything till now. While I was helping him, I noticed that he had his hand in his pocket and kept aggressively adjusting his crotch. At that point, I just wanted to get the fuck out of there, but he pretty much held me hostage and started bombarding me with strange personal questions and trying to get me to drink. Just weird shit about masturbation habits, what I jerk off to, if I like men, have I ever had sex with a guy, am I a virgin, and he even asked me if I have ever had a cock in my mouth and presented me with an offer. I refused to answer all the questions and promptly got the hell out of there after telling him off. I'm just completely shocked because this dude was the most popular guy in the neighborhood with a wife and kids. I just wonder if his wife knows about this or if he's behaved like this around any other people besides me.
The guy next door. I know a dude who killed his brother. This was way before I was born. There's a lot to the story. I don't really remember it all, but it was fucked. He eventually got out of prison after serving X amount of years. Pretty weird dude. We were all told to stay away from him as kids. Fast forward, I'm a young adult. I have 2 school-aged siblings, maybe 12 and 14. My mom comes home from work one night, and that dude's sitting on the front steps drinking. She says,
"What the fuck are you doing? Get the fuck away from my house."
He doesn't listen. My young brother and sister are home by themselves, mind you. My mom goes through the side door and calls the cops. The cops come, put dude in a police car, and dig around where he was sitting and pull out a gun under the steps. I know, wild as fuck, right? Anyway, dude went to prison for a while, got out, sobered up. My mom would see him hitchhiking sometimes and pick him up, and they would talk like they were friends. Shit was weird to me. I kind of felt that my mom thought she would rather befriend him than be someone he blamed for sending him to prison.
My neighbor has been stalking me for a month. I'm a female. I have noticed my neighbor doing some pretty creepy shit. The initial encounter was about a month ago while I was walking my dog up the street that's about a quarter mile from my house. The man was talking with a group of people, I think 3, and as I walked by he ran up to pet my dog. He was asking me questions about my dog, such as name and gender. He then began to ask me questions about where I lived, but more so asking for confirmation, as if somehow he already knew. This made me uncomfortable, so I went to leave, and then he attempted to give me a hug and a kiss on the cheek. Previous to this, I had never met this person. After walking away, I thought the whole situation was weird, but would proceed with caution in the future. Since then, there has been more encounters with this neighbor, such as I was walking up the street with my significant other. Then the neighbor seemed to be waiting for us as we were walking by. Without saying anything, he began calling our dog and trying to pet him. He continued this even as we were walking away. This was 2 days after the initial encounter. He drove by the house about 10 times within a short period of time. This happened at night while my boyfriend and I were walking our dog. When he saw us, he slowed down, turned on his hazards, flashed his headlights, honked, and shouted, "Hey," out the window with his music blasting. The song he was blasting happened to be Window Shopper by 50 Cent. The circling around the block began after we got into the house. This happened 2 weeks ago. He was in his vehicle waiting on the edge of the property. I noticed him when I walked outside with my dog, and then he quickly drove off. This happened 4 or 5 days after the circling. He was lurking at a stop sign in front of my home. As I was returning home from walking my dog, I noticed the neighbor standing near the stop sign, looking towards my home. He ran off when he noticed that I had seen him. This happened 4 days ago. Tonight, he was waiting in his vehicle on the edge of the property where he had a clear view of the basement door. He was noticed by some guests as they left through the door and proceeded to drive off. All of these encounters happened to coincide with when I walk my dog 4 times a day. I noticed that he tends to be outside more around the times that I would normally walk my dog. In that situation, I would go back inside and wait 45 minutes to walk, or go to the dog park for an hour instead. Unfortunately, we weren't able to record these encounters, but plan to start recording our walks from start to end, along with when we go outside, just in case he's there. The frequency has made me feel targeted as well as unsafe while walking my dog. I have taken a photo of his license plate, but I don't have much more physical evidence. I'd like to call the police, but without evidence, I doubt they can do anything. Any recommendations would be greatly appreciated. Edit, because some of you think I'm just gonna be nice to someone who grabbed me in the middle of the street. I was polite to him when he asked about my dog. I never answered his confirming questions about my home. After that moment, I was no longer polite. We have told him to fuck off, and the dog has snapped at him. For those of you saying he just loves the dog, who tries running up to a 50+ pound dog that's baring his teeth and growling at them? I moved out of the state to a very small town. First day of moving in, a neighbor walking his dog greets me and introduces himself to me. He gave me a quick rundown that the neighborhood is full of tweakers and other shady types. I took that as a general warning that may be all I have to deal with. A few months later, he invited me over to his place to teach me how to do some woodwork. As we were making a shelf for my cat to sit on, he starts asking me questions. To me, they were normal everyday questions, but looking back, I realize now that he was trying to get information out of me. Why did you move out here from out of state? Who lives with you? Do you have any other family members in the state or area? Once we were all done, we went to install the shelf, and he met my mom who stays with me. He talks to her for a bit, and then we left to walk back to his place. He starts telling me that he could see our yard from his place and noticed I barely go outside with my dogs. Told me not to worry, that if someone breaks into our place, he can see them and shoot them from his room. That's what I'm thinking. How is this possible because you live about a half block away? Before I can question him, he asked me if I want to see more of the town. I'm like, yeah, let's go. He walks to his car and pulls out something from his middle compartment and tells me to go into his pickup truck. So I do, while he's filling up the tank with gasoline. Once he's done, he walks to the driver's side and opens the door and drops the holster between us. He tells me not to worry about it as I look, trying to see if it has a gun or not. As we're driving, I realize he hasn't said a word for about 5 minutes, and this guy loves to hear his own voice. Another thing I noticed is that we're on a dirt road, and I haven't seen a single house, trailer, or vehicle for a while. I guess I gave off some nervous vibes because he suddenly goes, "So yeah, unless you know where you're going out here, you'll get lost. And it's best to have a pickup or ATV to drive here." After about another 10 minutes of silent driving, we get to a little creek. Luckily, there was another truck there. All he says is, "Oh, look at that. Someone else is here with us," and grabs his holster and gets out. We both see a lady with a big dog playing in the water. She turns to us and sees him walking closer to her. She gestures to his holster, and he tells her not to worry, that it's for snakes. She lifts her shirt above her waist to show her gun, and she tells him that she's not worried a bit. They talk for a few minutes, and she tells him that her husband is waiting for her to make dinner, and she's just out letting her dog have some playtime. The neighbor changes his tone and posture from confident to defensive now. She called her dog and then went back to her truck. He was watching her, and she hadn't started her truck yet. A few minutes pass, and he tells me I guess it's time to go too. When we get to his truck, she drives off. The drive back, I started getting uneasy and creeped out. Why'd you drive me all the way out there just to leave? Why tell me not to worry about the holstered gun, but tell the lady what it's for? I finally get out of my head and just break the silence and give him my life story as to why I moved. Finally, he responds that he can relate to my story and gives me the rundown of how this town is and what it's about, and that some people are more racist than others, and I should watch my back for that. Once we get back to his place, I tell him I have stuff to take care of at home and nope the hell out of there. I said to myself that if I'm ever going to hang out with him again, it won't be alone. This just happened a few hours ago, but I'm not really sure if it's a case for concern. I'm just feeling very uncomfortable after. I'm a 20-year-old female. I live with 2 other women, but our boyfriends stay over frequently. I was outside with my parents and boyfriend, handing out candy for some trick-or-treaters, when I saw my neighbor come outside. When we moved in, we quickly met our surrounding neighbors and the 2 that lived directly across the street. Turns out the guy's an addict and the wife has a medical condition, so she stays inside a lot. The husband approached me and my family and was generally pleasant to talk to before it turned incredibly uncomfortable. After about 30 minutes of speaking, he wouldn't leave. He began to accuse me and my roommates of throwing garbage in his can. He then went into detail about how he had it on camera and that there was a pair of underwear in the garbage bag. He described the person on the cameras as short and stout. I am 5'10", and you'll see why I'm saying this. He continues to go on about how his wife got mad at him because one of us did it, but he isn't too mad and isn't trying to get us in trouble. After about 15 minutes of this, his wife sends him a photo of my Facebook profile and says that's the person's name that was on the papers in the garbage. At that point, my parents went in and my boyfriend and I are alone with this man. He's saying that I must have done it and kept asking me why I put my underwear on the top, but my roommates and I have never thrown anything in his trash. I found their Facebooks and blocked them because it creeped me out, and he said that his wife tried to call the police about it. My parents just brushed it off, but I still feel uneasy. What do you guys make of this? Edit. I feel like I left a few things out because I wrote it very late last night. That being said, he also said my ex-roommate used to flirt with him while she would cut our grass. He also came to our door once and asked for Amanda, my last name, but neither my cousin or myself are named Amanda. He never said why he was at the door, and after we told him no, he just kinda took a minute and left, and we never heard anything since. He also mentioned of having a lot of guns and exclusively said not to piss off his wife before the accusations started. This happened in 2019. I no longer have contact with this person. When my husband and I lived in our first apartment together, I did not have a job. We had just moved to a new city and I had trouble finding anything. Naturally, I was at home because of this. Every day at the same time, I would walk Remy, 7-year-old female. We would always walk the same route in front of the leasing office across the street, by the basketball courts, and by the tennis courts before walking the rest of the property of the apartment complex. The first encounter I had with this guy gave me a ton of red flags, and I did report him to the leasing office because of his behavior. As I was walking Remy back home, this man who looks like he was in his 40s, glasses, gray hair, was walking from the basketball courts to the sidewalk. I stopped Remy because she was going to try to jump on him if she got close enough. He noticed us and asked, "Is she aggressive?" I told him, "No, she will just jump, and I know some people don't like dogs or dogs jumping around them." He looked me up and down, stared at my chest for a second, then asked if he could pet her. I said sure, because Remy's tail was going a million miles an hour, and she was wanting to meet the new person. He started talking to me while he was petting Remy. "I'm Joe. I just moved across the street. What's your dog's name?" I was nice to him, even though I had a weird feeling while talking to him. "This is Remy. I'm Megan. I live next to the groundskeeper with my fiancé. You'll like it here. The staff are awesome." The entire time I was talking, he was petting Remy and staring at my chest. Joe thanked me for letting him pet my dog and turned around to leave. I was weirded out but brushed it off and told myself it was probably nothing. I walked Remy the rest of the way home, but I noticed that Joe had went into the entrance of the apartment building but was watching me walk home through the glass. I hightailed it the rest of the way to the apartment. It freaked me out enough that I called the leasing office and told them that Joe was watching me walk home after meeting me and I was generally uncomfortable with him. I also had them come fix the blinds in the dining room because I didn't want anyone looking inside our apartment. After I loaded myself into the car and drove to my mother-in-law's house, I stayed there until my now husband got home. Anytime I walked Remy, and eventually Peach, my other dog, Joe was always somehow outside when I was. He always tried to come talk to me and pet my dogs. Luckily, when I got Peach, she would growl at him. She was and still is very protective of me. If I ever walked my dogs with my husband, he would never come talk to me. It was only if I was alone with Remy, or if I was completely alone. He also would start walking in the front of our apartment when my husband wasn't home. He would try to look through the sliding glass door to get a glimpse of me. My husband and I decided to move to a bigger apartment because we needed more space for the dogs and ourselves. The day I got our keys for our new apartment, just down the street, I had another experience with Joe that made me call the cops. I was walking both dogs around the block so I could finish up some last-minute packing. I saw Joe pull into the complex in his car. I stopped to let him go past me, but he waved me across the road. When I did cross, he pulled around really fast, with his window already rolled down. "Hey Megan, I was wondering, are you happy with your husband? If not, I can help you out." He looked me up and down and gave me a wink. I acted like I didn't hear him since I had my headphones in. I immediately went outside and locked the door behind me. I called the leasing office and told them what happened. I also let them know that I was going to call the cops, at least to make a report because his behavior was freaking me out and I wanted to at least have it documented. I called the non-emergent line and an officer came out. I told him what happened that day and some of the other creepy behavior from Joe before. The cop asked me, "Do you want me to give him a warning not to talk to you?" I said yes. I thanked the officer for his time and he took my name and phone number down. Then he went to the leasing office to talk to the staff about the situation. About an hour after the cop left, he gave me a call. He told me he talked to the property manager and he also ran Joe's license plate number. Told me that the leasing office has some other complaints from other tenants on file. He also mentioned he didn't get a chance to talk to him because Joe was already leaving as the cop arrived at the leasing office. I thanked him again for his time and finished packing. I decided to go to the leasing office to talk to the property manager just to clear up anything just in case. When I got there, the manager told me that Joe had multiple reports just like the officer told me. She also told me that she was going to have her on-site officer stop and talk to him and encourage him not to talk to me or any female residents. I thanked her and went home to start moving little things until my husband got home. I went almost 6 months without another incident from Joe. We moved to the 3rd floor and he didn't have any idea which apartment it was, so he couldn't bother us. I also made a point to have my dogs on certain schedules, so I never run into him if we were out. The last time Joe tried to talk to me, I turned around and walked away. I didn't let him get a word in. I did notice him harassing my neighbor outside when she was grilling one day. I told the leasing office about it just in case. A couple of months later he moved out because they wouldn't let him re-sign his lease. That was the last I saw of Joe. I carried a stun gun with me while I walked my dogs or by myself because of him. I was fully prepared to shock his ass a couple times if he ever got too close after I called the cops on him. I'm 20 now, and this took place when I was 13 or 14 years old. Though it's important that I know, I've always been a bigger, older looking guy. At the time of the story, I was roughly 6'1", 200 pounds, and I was in moderately decent shape since it was football season. I guess I just thought since I was such a big guy, nothing could ever happen to me. This story is about the night that proved me wrong. One night, I had gotten into an argument with my parents and needed to take a walk to blow off some steam. I had a set route I usually take to get to the park located on the other side of my neighborhood. By the time I arrived at the park, nightfall had already set in. I made my way to the only lit corner of the park, sat down at a bench, and began listening to music on my phone. I should note that I'm completely comfortable dropping my guard, as this was during a time where my relationship with my family was a bit strained, so coming here had become something of a regular occurrence. A few songs in, I noticed a car pull up in an unlit side of the park, which proceeds to immediately turn the headlights off. It was a silver SUV, but I couldn't tell the model or how many people were in the vehicle from where I was sitting. I didn't think much of it at first, as this really wasn't anything out of the ordinary. My neighborhood is rather large and divided into multiple parts, so people would frequently get lost trying to navigate it. I simply assumed that the driver had stopped to pull up directions on their phone. Nearly a good 10 minutes would pass and the vehicle still hadn't moved, which began to make me a bit nervous for some reason. The thought crossed my mind that whoever was in the car could be watching me, and as unlikely as that seemed, it was enough to get me to leave the park. As I was getting up, the vehicle turned its headlights back on. A sick feeling formed in my stomach, and I quickly made my way out of the park, breaking my usual route to ensure that I didn't have to go near that car. At this point, I didn't know what to do. I wanted to call my mom to come pick me up, but given the argument we just had, I stupidly convinced myself that calling her wouldn't be the right thing to do. I made my way to the end of the block, mentally preparing myself to wrap around the block and start heading back in the direction of the park, as that was my only way home. Just seconds later, as I reached the end of my block, the same car pulled out in front of me and came to a screeching stop. Not quite processing what happened, I simply stopped and watched the driver. An older man with a baseball cap and an unsettling smile that I could just barely make out in the darkness of the car. "Hey, you okay, buddy? You need a ride somewhere?" There wasn't anything out of the ordinary about his voice, but as he spoke to me, my stomach tied itself in knots. All I could do was mutter out a soft, "No," before the man reached all the way over and opened the passenger side door. "Hop in. I can take you anywhere you like, buddy." Snapping me out of the state of shock, I darted off behind the car without saying another word. I heard the man try to call out for me as I started running, but I couldn't make it out. I heard the car speed off as I continued trying to put as much distance between me and him as I possibly could. I made it a good few blocks away before I felt completely comfortable enough to stop running and decided to finally start making my way back home. Not long after, I heard a car coming up behind me into a quick stop, which made my heart feel like it was about to shoot out my chest. My nerves settled pretty quickly as I realized it was my mom, who set out looking for me when I didn't come home. She rolled down her window and began yelling at me to get in the car, but something was off in her voice. She didn't seem angry, but more so panicked. I did as she said, asking her what was wrong as we pulled off. She told me that she had just been at the park to look for me and saw the car, which had the same description as the one I encountered, partially blocking the road to shine its headlights into the park. She said as she pulled up, the car quickly backed out and sped off. Call it mother's intuition, I guess, but she immediately assumed I was involved somehow. Though I denied anything happening, as I've never really been someone who could talk about anything real with my family, my mom still reported the car to the police, and that was that. I never told my family what happened, and I haven't really ever spoken about this until now. This situation didn't stop me from going out for walks when I needed to de-stress, but I guess you can just credit that to me being a stupid teenage boy. I was certainly more cautious about my surroundings, like I said. That was that. I never saw the man again, and I moved on with my life. I can look back now and use this as an interesting story to tell people, but I truly was incredibly lucky to get out of that situation unharmed. Who knows what would have happened if I hadn't decided to leave the park, or if I hadn't been able to get away. Would I really have been able to bring myself to fight back if I needed? Maybe I wouldn't be here now, or maybe I would have been left with a much worse memory of that night. All I can say without a doubt is this man truly had awful intentions, and I'm very lucky to be here now. Moral of the story, be careful when you go out for walks at night, and always be aware of your surroundings. It doesn't matter who you are, anything can happen if someone has bad intentions. Not sure if this is the best subreddit to post this question on, but I didn't know where else to post. We recently moved into a house in a densely populated suburb located in the Midwest. More specifically, this neighborhood is located in an area where 2 miles south can be described as rough. Where we are actually located is okay, but not great. The homes in the neighborhood are humble homes that were built in the 40s or 50s. 2 houses down from our house is a 1-story yellow house that has always had 3 minivans parked in the driveway. The odd thing about this house is that the young men and young women seem to live in their vans. We first noticed this summer. We would walk by and see them laying on the mattresses in the vans with all their windows and doors open. They'd be sleeping or watching something on a laptop and have a long power cord that ran from the van to the house. No matter how hot the day was, they were in the van. I never once saw them coming from the house, just always in the van. The vans are parked right up the sidewalk in their driveway. Fast forward to now, and they are still in their van with an extension cord running into the house. This state we live in has cold winters. We're talking about 20 degrees Fahrenheit. It's worth noting that I have seen lights on inside the house. I have never seen any sort of construction or maintenance happening in or around the house, nor have I seen anything else on the property or living in the house. Any ideas to why they would be living in their vans when it seems like they have a house right there they could be more comfortable living in?